The train lurched to a stop with a metal shriek that made Lenora Whitmore's teeth ache. Through the sooty window, she caught her first glimpse of Red Hollow, Montana territory, a collection of wooden buildings squatting in the dirt like they'd given up halfway through being built. The sky hung low and gray, threatening snow that would probably arrive before nightfall. Lenora's fingers tightened around the handle of her single battered suitcase. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had cost more than she could afford, lay the wedding dress. White silk with pearl buttons down the back. She'd sewn it herself by candlelight over 3 months, each stitch a prayer that Marcus Holloway's letters hadn't been lies. My dearest Lenora, the ranch awaits you. I have prepared everything for our union. The mountains here touch the sky, and I promise you a life of dignity and partnership unlike anything the crowded streets of Philadelphia could offer. She'd read that letter so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. 23 years old, unmarried, working 16-hour days in a textile factory where the air tasted like lint and defeat. Marcus Holloway's proposal had felt like a door opening in a locked room. The conductor passed through the car, calling out arrivals. Lenora stood, smoothing her traveling dress. It was dove gray, practical, with only a touch of lace at the collar. She'd wanted to look dignified when Marcus first saw her. Not desperate. Not like a woman who'd spent her last $40 on a train ticket west because staying in Philadelphia meant dying there slowly. The platform was nearly empty when she stepped down. A few rough-looking men loaded cargo onto a freight wagon. An older woman in black hurried past without making eye contact. The air smelled like wood smoke and horses and something else, a kind of emptiness that made Lenora's chest tighten. She set down her suitcase and waited. An hour passed, then 2. The sun started its descent behind the mountains, turning the sky the color of a bruise. The platform cleared out completely. Lenora stood alone beside her suitcase, the wedding dress growing heavier inside it with every minute that Marcus Holloway failed to appear. By the time the station master came out to lock up, her hands had gone numb from cold. You waiting on someone, miss? He was middle-aged, weathered, with kind eyes that had clearly seen this exact scene before. Marcus Holloway, Lenora said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He was supposed to meet me. He sent for me. We're to be married. Something shifted in the station master's expression, not quite pity, more like resignation. Holloway, he repeated slowly. Big ranch north of here? Wrote you letters about partnership and Montana sunsets? Hope flared in Lenora's chest. Yes. Do you know where I can find him? The station master took off his cap and rubbed the back of his neck. Miss, I don't know how to tell you this gently, so I'll just say it plain. There ain't no Marcus Holloway. Never was. That name's been used before, usually in letters sent east to women looking for a fresh start. Fellow who writes them doesn't even live in Red Hollow. Probably doesn't live in Montana at all. The words hit her like ice water. That's not possible. I have 12 letters. He described the ranch. He told me about... I know what he told you, miss. I'm real sorry. Lenora's knees felt loose. She locked them, refusing to sit, refusing to cry, refusing to give this God-forsaken platform the satisfaction of watching her crumble. Is there a hotel? She managed. Granger's Inn, 2 blocks north. Fair warning, it ain't cheap and it ain't nice. She picked up her suitcase. The handle felt slippery in her palm. Thank you for your honesty. She made it exactly half a block before she had to stop and lean against a hitching post, fighting down the nausea that came with understanding just how completely she'd been destroyed. No Marcus Holloway. No ranch. No wedding. And exactly $7.35 left to her name. Granger's Inn smelled like boiled cabbage and mildew. The room cost $1.50 per night, which meant Lenora could afford 4 nights if she didn't eat. The mattress was thin and lumpy. The single window overlooked an alley where stray dogs fought over scraps. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her traveling dress, and stared at the wall. The smart thing would be to get back on the train. Philadelphia had nothing for her, but at least it was familiar. At least she knew which streets to avoid and which factory foreman would hire women without asking too many questions. But the return ticket would take every cent she had left. She'd arrive back east with literally nothing. No job, no room, no prospects, just the humiliation of having tried to escape and failed so spectacularly that the story would follow her forever. That's Lenora Whitmore. Traveled all the way to Montana for a husband who didn't exist. Poor fool. She pulled the wedding dress out of the suitcase and held it up to the lamplight. The silk caught the glow, turning golden. All those nights sewing, all those hours imagining a different life. Lenora folded it carefully and put it back. Then she lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion pulled her under. The next 3 days passed in a fog of shame and dwindling options. Lenora tried to find work. She walked into every business in Red Hollow asking if they needed help. The general store didn't need a clerk. The restaurant didn't need a waitress. The seamstress didn't need an assistant. One saloon owner offered her a job that had nothing to do with serving drinks, and she walked out before he finished explaining the terms. Everywhere she went, people stared. Word had spread fast about the Eastern woman waiting for a husband who didn't exist. Some folks looked at her with pity, others with contempt, a few with the kind of hunger that made her walk faster and keep her eyes down. By the fourth day, she was down to $3 and some change. The return train would leave tomorrow morning. If she wanted to eat between here and Philadelphia, she needed to be on it. Lenora packed her suitcase that evening with mechanical precision. The wedding dress went back in first, wrapped in its tissue paper like a corpse. Then her other dress, her shawl, her brush, the book of poetry she'd brought because she'd imagined reading it aloud to Marcus by firelight in their ranch house that didn't exist. She closed the suitcase and sat on it, pressing down hard to make the latches catch. Tomorrow morning, back to the platform, back onto the train, back to a city that would chew her up and spit out whatever was left. She should cry. That would be the normal thing. But tears required energy she didn't have anymore. Instead, she stood up, smoothed her dress, and headed out for one last walk through Red Hollow before it became a story she'd have to carry forever. But the sun was setting when Lenora reached the train platform. She hadn't meant to come here. Her feet had just carried her back to the scene of the original disaster, like some kind of sick pilgrimage. The platform was empty again. The station master had already locked up. In a few hours, the night train would pass through heading south, but it wouldn't stop unless someone signaled. The morning eastbound was the one she needed. Lenora sat down on a bench, her back to the tracks, and watched the mountains turn purple in the dying light. She didn't hear the child approach until a small voice said, "Are you the lady who got left?" Lenora turned sharply. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Wild dark hair pulled into braids that had mostly come undone. A dress that had been patched so many times it was hard to tell what the original fabric had looked like. Dirt on her knees and fierce intelligence burning in brown eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Who's asking?" Lenora said quietly. "Maisie Boone." The girl stepped closer, looking Lenora up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "You really came all this way to marry some man you never met?" "I did." "That's stupid." Despite everything, Lenora felt a laugh try to escape. She trapped it before it could turn hysterical. "Yes, it was." Maisie tilted her head, studying her. "But you're still here." "Not for long. I leave tomorrow." "Back east?" "Back east? To what?" The question was too sharp, too knowing. Lenora looked away. "That's none of your concern." "My pa needs a wife," Maisie announced suddenly. Lenora's head snapped back toward the girl. "Excuse me?" "My pa, Gideon Boone, he's a widower. Our ranch is dying. He won't admit it, but I ain't stupid. I see the bills stacking up and I hear him pacing at night when he thinks I'm asleep. We need help. You need somewhere to go." Maisie crossed her arms. "Would you marry my father instead?" For a long moment, Lenora could only stare at this impossible child proposing an impossible solution. "You can't just—" she started, then stopped. "Does your father know you're here?" "No." "Does he know you're proposing to strange women on his behalf?" "You ain't strange. You're desperate. There's a difference." Maisie's expression didn't change. "We're desperate too." "That makes us even." Lenora stood up slowly. "Sweetheart, I appreciate the offer, but I can't marry someone I've never met based on a conversation with his 8-year-old daughter." "I'm 9, Maisie corrected. "And yeah, you can. You were going to marry Marcus Holloway, and he don't even exist. My pa exists. He's solid. He's honest. He's just—" She hesitated, searching for words. "He's stuck. Since Ma died, he's been stuck. And the ranch is falling apart. And I can't fix it by myself." "I'm not." Lenora tried to find a gentle way to refuse. I'm not a rancher. I worked in a textile factory. I don't know anything about livestock or crops or... You know how to work hard, Maisie interrupted. I can tell. You got that look? Like you've been fighting your whole life and you ain't dead yet. She took a step closer. We don't need someone who knows ranching. We need someone who knows how to fight when everything's going wrong. That's you, ain't it? Lenora's throat felt tight. You don't know anything about me. I know you came all this way for nothing, and you're still sitting up straight instead of crying in a ditch somewhere. I know you walked around town for 3 days asking for work when most women would have just left. I know you ain't on that train yet, even though you probably should be. Maisie's voice dropped. I know desperation when I see it, because I'm drowning in it myself. The truth in those words hit harder than Lenora expected. Where's this ranch? She heard herself ask. 12 miles northwest, up in the foothills. And your father, Gideon, he has no idea you're making this offer? He'd never ask for help. He's too proud. Or too broken. Maybe both. Maisie's jaw set stubbornly. But I ain't too proud to ask, and I ain't too broken yet, so I'm asking. Come meet him. Stay a few days. See if maybe we can help each other instead of both drowning separate. Lenora looked at this fierce little girl with her patched dress and her impossible request, and her eyes that had clearly seen more hardship than most adults. She thought about the train tomorrow, about Philadelphia, about the factory floor and the textile dust and the slow suffocation of surviving without ever actually living. She thought about the wedding dress in her suitcase, wrapped in tissue paper like hope that had died before being born. And she thought about the strange, terrifying possibility that maybe being left on this platform wasn't the end of her story. Maybe it was just the worst beginning. If I come meet your father, Lenora said slowly, and he wants nothing to do with this arrangement, then you leave, no harm done. And if he... Lenora couldn't quite believe she was entertaining this. If he agrees to... What exactly? Marriage? Eventually? Maybe. I don't know. Maisie's certainty wavered for the first time. Right now I just need him to not be alone anymore. And I need someone who can help keep the ranch alive long enough for... She stopped, looking away. Long enough for it to matter that we tried. Lenora sat back down on the bench. Her hands were shaking slightly. This is insane. Yep. I could end up worse off than I am now. Probably. Your father could be... Lenora hesitated. He could be dangerous. He ain't! Maisie's voice turned fierce. He's sad. He's lost. He's barely holding on. But he ain't mean. And he ain't dangerous. And he'd never hurt you. I swear it. A child's promise about her father isn't... It's all I got to offer, Maisie interrupted. That and a dying ranch and a man who forgot how to want to live. You take it or leave it, but decide now because it's getting dark, and I got a long walk home. Lenora looked at the mountains, purple and distant, holding secrets she'd never learn if she got on that train tomorrow. She looked at her suitcase, containing everything she owned and nothing that mattered. She looked at Maisie Boone, 9 years old and carrying burdens that should have crushed her, but somehow hadn't. I'll come meet him, Lenora said quietly, but I'm not promising anything beyond that. Maisie's face split into a grin so bright it was almost painful to see. That's all I'm asking. Come on, we can catch the supply wagon if we hurry. Old Mr. Chen heads up our way once a week and he don't ask too many questions. She grabbed Lenora's hand and pulled. Lenora stood, picked up her suitcase, and followed this strange child into the gathering darkness. Behind her, Red Hollow's lights began to flicker on one by one, marking a town she was leaving before ever really arriving. Ahead, the mountains waited, and somewhere in those foothills, a man named Gideon Boone was about to discover that his daughter had dragged home a solution he never asked for. Skates. The supply wagon rattled over rough roads for nearly 2 hours. Old Mr. Chen, a wiry Chinese man who'd apparently been running supplies in Montana Territory for 30 years, asked no questions about why Lenora was traveling into the wilderness with a 9-year-old girl he clearly knew. He just nodded when Maisie asked for the ride, accepted the 2 pennies she pressed into his palm, and clicked his tongue to get the horses moving. They rode in the back among crates of dry goods, flour sacks, and mysterious bundles wrapped in oilcloth. The temperature dropped as they climbed into the foothills. Lenora pulled her shawl tighter and watched Red Hollow disappear behind them. "You're awful quiet," Maisie observed, sitting cross-legged on a flour sack. "I'm thinking. About running? About what I'm going to say when your father realizes what you've done." Maisie shrugged. "Pa don't say much these days anyway, probably won't even yell." "That's not reassuring." "Didn't say it was." The wagon crested a hill and the landscape opened up. In the twilight, Lenora could make out rolling grassland, dark pine forests, and distant peaks still capped with snow, even though it was late September. The sky had cleared, revealing stars so bright and numerous she felt dizzy looking at them. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, surprising herself. "Wait till you see it in daylight," Maisie said. "Ma used to say Montana was proof that something out there liked making pretty things just for the hell of it." She paused. "Of course, that was before she died and left us here alone." "How long ago?" 18 months, and Maisie's voice went flat. "Fever. Came on fast. She was laughing at breakfast and gone by sunset. Doc said sometimes that's just how it happens. Quick, like mercy." "I'm sorry." "Yeah, well, being sorry don't bring her back, and it don't pay the mortgage neither." The bitterness in those words was so adult it made Lenora's chest ache. She wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but everything that came to mind sounded hollow. So she just sat quietly and let the wagon carry them deeper into the wilderness. The Boone Ranch appeared out of the darkness like a collection of shadows trying to hold the shape of buildings. Mr. Chen pulled the wagon to a stop near what looked like the main house, a two-story structure with a sagging porch and shutters that needed paint. "This is far as I go tonight," Chen said. "You need anything, Maisie girl? You send word." "Thanks, Mr. Chen." Maisie hopped down and reached for Lenora's suitcase. "Come on, let's get this over with." Lenora climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from the ride. The air smelled different here, pine and sage and wood smoke. In the distance, she could hear cattle lowing softly. The front door of the house opened, spilling lamplight across the porch. A man stepped out. Even backlit and half-shadowed, Lenora could tell he was tall, broad-shouldered. He moved with the careful economy of someone who'd learned to conserve energy because there was never enough of it to spare. "Maisie?" His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used much recently. "Where the hell have you been? It's past dark." "I know, Pa. I was in town." Maisie set down the suitcase and pushed Lenora forward slightly. "I brought someone." Gideon Boone stepped off the porch, moving into the moonlight. He was younger than Lenora expected, maybe 35 at most, dark hair in need of cutting, a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so obviously exhausted. His eyes locked on Lenora with an expression somewhere between confusion and the weary resignation of a man whose life had stopped making sense a long time ago. "Who's this?" he said flatly. "Her name's Lenora Whitmore. She came all the way from Philadelphia to marry a man who don't exist. She needs a place to stay, and we need help. I asked if she'd be willing to marry you instead." The silence that followed was so complete Lenora could hear her own heartbeat. Gideon stared at his daughter, then at Lenora, then back at Maisie. "You did what?" he said finally. "She's perfect, Pa. She's strong, and she's smart, and she's desperate just like us, so she might actually say yes. We can't keep going like this. You know we can't. You're killing yourself working from dawn to dark, and we're still losing ground. We need—" "What we need," Gideon interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet, "is for you to stop dragging strangers home like stray dogs." Maisie flinched. "She ain't a stranger. Her name's Lenora, and—" "I heard her name." Gideon's jaw was tight. "Miss Whitmore, I apologize for my daughter. She doesn't understand—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "You can stay the night. It's too dark to send you back now. But tomorrow I'll take you to town myself, and—" "I don't need charity," Lenora said quietly. Her voice surprised even herself. It came out steadier than it had any right to be. Gideon looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were gray, tired, completely devoid of the hope Maisie still carried. "Wasn't offering charity," he said. "Was offering common decency. Your daughter seems to think you need help." "My daughter," Gideon said tightly, "is 9 years old and doesn't know a damn thing about what I need. I know we're going to lose the ranch if something don't change, Maisie shot back. I know the bank man came by last week and you wouldn't let me hear what he said, but I heard it anyway. I know you sold Ma's jewelry to pay the feed bill. I know... Enough. The single word cracked like a whip. Inside. Now. Maisie's chin came up stubbornly. No. Maisie. She's staying tonight, Pa. You said it yourself. Too dark to send her back. And tomorrow maybe you could stop being so damn stubborn for 5 minutes and actually look at what I brought you. Someone who might help. Someone who might care. Someone who ain't here because they pity you, but because they got nowhere else to go neither. That's exactly why she shouldn't stay, Gideon said wearily. She's desperate. We're desperate. Desperate people make terrible decisions. Then what's one more terrible decision? Maisie's voice cracked. We're drowning anyway. Might as well try something crazy before we go under. Father and daughter stared at each other in the moonlight. The tension between them was thick enough to choke on. Lenora cleared her throat. Both of them turned to look at her like they'd forgotten she was there. I don't expect marriage, she said carefully. And I don't expect to stay if I'm not wanted. But your daughter isn't wrong about me being desperate. I have $7 to my name and a return ticket to a city where I've got nothing waiting. So if you're willing to let me stay a few days, not as a bride, just as hired help, I'll work for room and board. No promises beyond that. From either of us. Gideon studied her with those exhausted gray eyes. You ever worked on a ranch before? No. You know anything about livestock? No. Crops? Fencing? Equipment repair? No to all of it. Then what exactly do you think you can help with? Lenora met his gaze evenly. I don't know yet, but I know how to work until my hands bleed and I know how to keep going when everything looks hopeless. If that's not useful here, then I'll leave tomorrow with no hard feelings. Something flickered across Gideon's face. Not quite interest. Maybe recognition, like he was seeing a mirror of his own stubbornness reflected back at him. 1 week, he said finally. Room and board. You work, you stay, you don't pull your weight, you go. And if Maisie mentions marriage one more time, I'm dragging you back to town myself. Clear? Clear, Lenora said. Good. He turned toward the house. Maisie, show her the guest room, then get yourself to bed. We'll talk about you running off to town tomorrow. He disappeared inside without another word. Maisie grinned up at Lenora. Told you he'd say yes. That wasn't yes. That was grudging tolerance. It's a start. Maisie picked up the suitcase again. Come on, I'll show you where you'll sleep. Fair warning, the house is kind of a disaster. Pa stopped caring about things like clean dishes after Ma died. She wasn't exaggerating. The inside of the house looked like someone had given up on basic civilization. Dishes piled in the sink, dust on every surface, a cold fireplace full of old ashes, furniture that had been functional once but now just looked tired. The only sign of recent life was a stack of papers on the kitchen table covered in numbers. Accounts, Lenore realized. Bills, debt calculations, the arithmetic of slow failure. Guest room's upstairs, Maisie said, leading the way. Used to be Ma's sewing room before. Well, anyway, there's a bed and a window. That's about it. The room was small, barely larger than a closet. A narrow bed with a thin mattress. A window overlooking the dark yard. A hook on the wall that might have once held pictures, but now held nothing. It was cold and bare, and somehow still better than Granger's Inn. Thank you, Lenora said quietly. Maisie set down the suitcase. You really gonna stay? 1 week, like your father said. And then? I don't know. Maisie nodded slowly. That's honest, anyway. She turned to leave, then stopped in the doorway. Miss Whitmore? I know I probably shouldn't have dragged you out here, and I know Pa's gonna be mad at me for a while, but I ain't sorry I did it. We needed... She paused. I needed to try something, anything, before it's too late. What happens if it's already too late? Then at least I'll know I tried everything. She slipped out, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Lenora sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked around her new temporary home. Through the thin walls, she could hear Gideon moving around downstairs. Heavy footsteps, the scrape of a chair, then silence. She pulled Marcus Holloway's letters out of her suitcase and held them in her lap. All those promises, all those lies, all those hours of hope that had led her to this cold room in a dying ranch in the middle of nowhere. She should burn them. That would be the symbolic thing to do. Turn them into ash and start fresh. But Lenora was too tired for symbolism. She tucked the letters back into her suitcase, lay down fully clothed, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would wake up and discover what kind of disaster she'd actually agreed to. Tonight, she just needed to stop thinking long enough to sleep. Outside, the Montana wind picked up, rattling the window frame and carrying the smell of sage across the darkness. Somewhere in the house, Gideon Boone sat alone in the kitchen, staring at bills he couldn't pay and wondering what the hell his daughter had just done. And upstairs in the guest room, Lenora Whitmore lay in the dark and wondered the exact same thing. Neither of them had any answers yet, but morning would come anyway, bringing with it all the impossible work of survival. And maybe, just maybe, the first small possibilities of something more. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that felt like a warning. Lenora woke to the sound of a rooster screaming its head off somewhere outside and the smell of wood smoke drifting through the floorboards. Her body ached from the thin mattress and the tension she'd carried in her shoulders all night. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came back. The platform. Maisie. The wagon ride into darkness. Gideon Boone's exhausted face in the moonlight, agreeing to 1 week like he was signing his own death warrant. She sat up slowly, her breath visible in the cold air. The room looked even worse in daylight. Bare walls, cracked plaster, a water stain on the ceiling shaped like something that might have been a map of nowhere in particular. Through the thin window, she could see the ranch spread out below in shades of brown and gray. Sagging fences. A barn that leaned slightly to one side like it was drunk. Distant cattle moving slow across dead grass. It looked exactly like what it was. A place dying by inches. Lenora stood and smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could. She hadn't packed for ranch work because she'd been packing for a wedding that never happened. Everything she owned was either too fine or too impractical. The dove gray traveling dress would have to do until it fell apart. She made her way downstairs, following the smell of coffee that was probably strong enough to strip paint. The kitchen was empty, but someone had been there recently. A pot of coffee sat on the stove, still hot. Dirty dishes had been shoved aside to make room for a single clean cup, a piece of hard bread, and a jar of something that might have been preserves once but now looked suspicious. A note sat beside the cup, written in blocky handwriting that looked like it had been carved into the paper rather than written. Work starts at sunrise. You're late. Find Maisie if you want to be useful. Don't touch anything expensive because we can't afford to replace it. That includes the horses. No signature, no pleasantries. Lenora poured herself coffee that tasted like liquid bitterness and stared at the note. Gideon Boone clearly wasn't interested in making this easy. Fine. She hadn't come here expecting easy. She drank the coffee standing up, forced down the hard bread that nearly broke her teeth, and went looking for Maisie. She found her behind the barn, attempting to fix a fence post that had rotted clean through at the base. The girl had a hammer, a handful of nails, and an expression of pure frustration as she whacked at wood that refused to cooperate. "That's not going to work," Lenora observed. Maisie jumped, dropping the hammer. "Jesus, you scared me. Sorry, your father left me a note. Said to find you if I wanted to be useful." "Of course he did." Maisie picked up the hammer and glared at the fence post. "He's been out since before dawn checking the north pasture. Probably won't be back till noon. Leaves me with all the close-in work like I got 8 hands instead of 2. "What needs doing?" Maisie looked at her skeptically. "You ever mucked out a stall?" "No." "Fed chickens?" "No." "Hauled water? Mended tack? Anything?" "I can sew," Lenora offered, "and I'm good with numbers. And I once kept a textile factory floor from falling apart when 3 machines broke in one day and the foreman was drunk." "Well, we ain't got textile machines, but we got plenty of broken things." Maisie wiped sweat off her forehead with a dirty hand, leaving a streak of mud. "Fine. You can start with the chickens. They're mean and stupid, and they'll peck you given half a chance, but they need feeding, and the eggs need collecting. Coop's around the side of the barn. Can't miss it on account of the smell." Lenora found the chicken coop exactly where Maisie said, a ramshackle structure that looked like it had been built by someone who'd only heard chickens described secondhand and wasn't particularly interested in accuracy. The smell hit her 10 feet away. Inside, 24 birds clucked and squawked and regarded her with the malevolent suspicion that chickens somehow perfected over thousands of years of domestication. She found a bucket of feed and started scattering it like she'd seen illustrated in a book once. The chickens swarmed immediately, pecking at the ground, and each other with equal aggression. "All right," Lenora muttered. "Eggs. You're supposed to have eggs." The nesting boxes were built into the wall, dark and mysterious, and almost certainly full of things waiting to bite her. She reached into the first one carefully. A chicken exploded out with a shriek of pure rage, wings flapping in her face. Lenora jerked back, stumbled, and landed hard on her ass in chicken shit and old straw. From somewhere outside, she heard Maisie laugh. "Should have warned you," the girl called through the fence. "The brown one's territorial." Lenora stood up slowly, covered in filth, and glared at the chicken that had already returned to its nest and was eyeing her with smug satisfaction. "All right," she said quietly. "That's how it's going to be." She rolled up her sleeves, marched back to the nesting boxes, and started pulling eggs out with systematic determination. The chickens protested loudly. A few pecked her hands hard enough to draw blood. She ignored them and kept working until she'd collected 24 eggs in a basket that had definitely seen better days. By the time she emerged from the coop, her dress was ruined, her hands were bleeding, and she'd learned that she hated chickens with a passion she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. Maisie looked at her critically. "You got egg on your face?" "I have chicken shit everywhere else. Seemed only fair." The girl cracked a smile. "You didn't quit." "Quitting means going back to Philadelphia. I hate chickens, but I hate the idea of admitting defeat more." "Good." Maisie took the egg basket. "Now let's see how you do with the real work." The real work, it turned out, was endless and brutal and designed to break anyone foolish enough to attempt it. Lenora hauled water from the well until her shoulders screamed. She learned to work the hand pump that fought her every stroke like it had personal grievances. She dragged 50-pound feed sacks across the barn, while Maisie watched with the critical eye of a 9-year-old who'd been doing this work since she could walk. "You're doing it wrong," Maisie said when Lenora tried to lift a sack by grabbing it from the top. "Then show me the right way." Maisie demonstrated, getting underneath, using legs instead of back, moving with the weight instead of against it. Lenora tried to copy her and failed twice before getting it right. The third time, she managed to haul the sack across the barn without dropping it or throwing out her back. "Better," Maisie said grudgingly. They worked through the morning without stopping. Every time Lenora thought they might be done, Maisie found something else that needed doing. Fence repair, stall mucking, organizing a tool shed that looked like it had been ransacked by someone with a grudge against order. Around mid-morning, Lenora straightened up from wrestling with a coil of rope that had somehow tied itself into knots that defied physics and looked at Maisie seriously. "Does your father know how much work you're doing here?" Maisie kept her eyes on the bridle she was attempting to mend. "He knows." "And he's fine with a 9-year-old handling this much responsibility?" "He ain't fine with it, but there's only 2 of us and twice as much work as we can handle, so being fine with it don't really matter." She pulled the leather tight, testing the repair. "Besides, I'm good at it. Better than him at some things. He knows cattle and land, but I'm better with the small stuff, the detail work." "That's not a childhood. Neither is starving." Maisie looked up, her expression flat. "You want to feel sorry for me? Go ahead. But save your pity for something useful like helping me get this bridle fixed before Pa gets back and sees I broke it again." Lenora crouched down beside her. "Show me what you're trying to do." Together, they worked on the bridle until it looked halfway functional. Maisie's hands were small but capable, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to make every motion count. Lenora watched and learned and tried not to think about what kind of life forced a child to develop skills like this. Noon came and went. Gideon didn't return. "He does this sometimes," Maisie said when Lenora asked. "Gets out to the far pastures and decides to fix one more thing. One more thing always turns into 6 more things, and suddenly it's dark and he's been working for 16 hours straight. That's not sustainable. Tell him that. He won't listen. Thinks if he just works hard enough, everything will fix itself." Maisie's voice went bitter. "Meanwhile, the ranch keeps dying slow, and he keeps pretending not to notice." They ate a cold lunch of more hard bread and jerky that could have doubled his shoe leather. Lenora's whole body hurt. Her hands were blistered and bleeding. Her dress was destroyed beyond any hope of salvation. She smelled like a combination of chicken shit, horse sweat, and her own exhaustion. And somewhere underneath all of it, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Useful. Not just employed. Not just surviving. Actually necessary to something that mattered to someone. "What's next?" she asked when they'd finished eating. Maisie looked at her with something approaching respect. You serious? I've got a week. Might as well earn my keep. All right then, let's see if you can help me with the real problem. Maisie led her to the barn and pulled out a leather-bound book from a hiding spot behind some loose boards. The pages were covered in numbers written in two different hands, one neat and careful, the other scrawled and increasingly desperate. This is Ma's account book, Maisie explained. She kept track of everything. Every dollar in, every dollar out, every debt, every payment, every bit of inventory. After she died, Pa tried to keep it up, but She hesitated. He ain't good with numbers, and he's too proud to admit it. Lenora took the book carefully and started flipping through pages. What she saw made her stomach drop. The ranch was worse than dying. It was already dead and just hadn't stopped moving yet. Debt stacked on debts. Payments missed. Interest compounding. Feed costs that exceeded cattle sales by margins that made no economic sense. And underneath all of it, a pattern of someone making decisions based on hope instead of arithmetic. How bad is it? Maisie asked quietly. Honestly? Yeah, Lenora closed the book. Without a significant change in revenue or a massive reduction in costs, you've got maybe 6 months before the bank forecloses. And that's optimistic. Maisie's face went pale. Pa said we had longer. Your father is either lying to you or lying to himself. Can you fix it? I don't know, maybe, if... Lenora stopped. I'd need to see everything, all the records, all the contracts, everything your mother kept and everything your father's been doing since. Pa won't like that. Your father doesn't like much of anything as far as I can tell. But if he wants to keep this ranch, he's going to have to let someone who understands numbers actually look at the numbers. Maisie chewed her lip, thinking. You really think you can help? I think I can tell you the truth about where you stand. Whether that helps or just makes everything more obvious, Lenora shrugged. At least you'll know what you're actually fighting. Pa's gonna be pissed. He's already pissed. Might as well give him a reason. A slow grin spread across Maisie's face. I knew I liked you. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever Lenora might have said next. They both turned to see Gideon riding in on a horse that looked as exhausted as its rider. He dismounted stiffly, moving like every muscle in his body was screaming, and led the horse toward the barn without acknowledging either of them. Pa, Maisie called, we need to talk. Later. It's about the accounts. Gideon stopped. His shoulders went rigid. When he turned around, his face was carefully blank. What about them? Miss Whitmore looked at Ma's book. She says she had no business looking at anything. Gideon's voice was dangerously quiet. That book is private. That book is falling apart and the numbers in it are killing us, Maisie shot back. She knows accounting. She can help. We don't need... Yes, we do, Maisie's voice cracked. Stop lying about it. We're losing everything and you know it, and you're too damn stubborn to admit we need help. The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate in. Gideon looked at his daughter with an expression Lenora couldn't quite read. Pain, maybe, or shame. Or just the exhaustion of a man who'd been fighting a losing battle for so long he'd forgotten what winning even looked like. Inside, he said finally. Both of you, now. The kitchen table became a battlefield in under 5 minutes. Gideon slammed the account book down on the scarred wood and glared at Lenora like she'd personally orchestrated his financial ruin. You want to see the numbers? Fine. See them. Tell me something I don't already know. Lenora opened the book and started going through it page by page, asking questions that Gideon answered with increasing irritation. How much did feed cost last winter? What did they get per head on the last cattle sale? How much were the property taxes? When was the last time they'd actually turned a profit? The answers painted a picture of systematic failure. The ranch had been marginal even before Gideon's wife died. After her death, it had gone into free fall. Gideon had tried to compensate by working harder, but hard work without strategy was just exhaustion with extra steps. You're paying twice what you should for feed, Lenora said, running calculations in her head. And you're selling cattle at the wrong time of year. Every sale you've made in the last 18 months has been at a loss. I sell when I need cash, Gideon said tightly, which is exactly when buyers know they can lowball you. They're watching your desperation and pricing accordingly. So what's your solution? Wait until I have money to sell cattle? That's not how it works. No, but there are other revenue streams you're not using. This land, Lenora tapped the survey map tucked into the back of the book. You've got timber here, water access here, grazing land you're not utilizing because you're focused entirely on cattle that aren't profitable. Timber takes time to harvest. Water rights are complicated, and I don't have the money to expand the herd even if I had the grazing land. So diversify. Your wife was doing it before she died. I can see it in the early entries. She was selling preserves, medicinal herbs, small goods that brought in steady cash between cattle sales. Why did that stop? Because I'm one man running a ranch that needs three, Gideon exploded. I can't be everywhere doing everything. I can barely keep the cattle alive and the fences standing. I don't have time to... He stopped, his jaw working. I don't have time to do the things my wife did. I'm not her. I'm not good at the things she was good at. The admission hung in the air like something painful and true. Lenora kept her voice level. Then let someone else do them. Who? Maisie? She's 9 years old. I'm not... Me. Gideon stared at her. You. I can't help with the cattle or the land management. That's your expertise. But I can handle accounts. I can organize a trading operation. I ran a textile factory floor when the foreman was too drunk to find his own ass with both hands. I think I can figure out how to sell preserves at a profit. You've been here one day. And in one day I've seen exactly how bad things are. You're not failing because you're lazy or stupid. You're failing because you're trying to do everything yourself and there's no human being alive who can sustain that. Lenora leaned forward. Let me help, real help, not just hauling water and feeding chickens. Let me take over the parts you're not good at so you can focus on the parts you are. In exchange for what? Room and board, same terms we already agreed to. That's it? That's it. Gideon's eyes narrowed. Why? Because going back to Philadelphia means dying slowly in a factory, and I've already done enough slow dying for one lifetime. Because your daughter dragged me out here for a reason, and maybe that reason is I'm actually useful for something besides being humiliated on train platforms. And because... Lenora paused. Because I don't like watching things die when they could be saved. Maisie was watching them both with barely contained hope. Gideon was watching Lenora like he was trying to see inside her skull and figure out what the catch was. Finally, he spoke. 1 month. You said 1 week. 1 week was to see if you'd break. You didn't break. 1 month is to see if you can actually do what you're claiming. You make a difference. Real, measurable difference in the accounts. You can stay longer. You don't, or you cause more problems than you solve, you go. No arguments. Deal. Gideon stood abruptly. I'm going to check the stock before dark. Maisie, show her where your mother kept the preserve supplies. If she's serious about this, might as well start tomorrow. He walked out without another word. Maisie waited until he was out of earshot, then let out a breath she'd been holding. He's testing you. I know. He does that. Tests people to see if they'll quit. Most people quit. I'm not most people. Yeah? Maisie smiled. I'm starting to figure that out. That night, Lenora sat in her cold little room surrounded by papers she'd borrowed from the kitchen. Account books, receipts, contracts written in legal language that was clearly designed to confuse anyone who tried to read it. Supply lists, market prices from 2 years ago that were probably useless now, but at least gave her a baseline. She worked by lamplight until her eyes burned and her head ached, building a picture of what the ranch had been and what it could be again. The preserve operation had been small but profitable. Martha Boone had been selling to 3 general stores in nearby settlements, plus occasional orders from miners and railroad workers who wanted something that tasted like civilization. Nothing fancy, just berry preserves, pickled vegetables, medicinal tinctures made from local plants. It had brought in maybe $30 a month, not enough to save the ranch, but enough to keep it breathing. Lenora started making lists, supplies needed, equipment required, potential markets, pricing strategies. By midnight, she had the skeleton of a plan that might work if she didn't think about it too hard or acknowledge all the ways it could fail spectacularly. She fell asleep at the small table, her head on her folded arms, surrounded by numbers that added up to either salvation or just another spectacular way to fail. The next morning started before dawn with Maisie banging on her door. You awake? Pa's already gone and we got work. Lenora dragged herself out of bed, her neck screaming from sleeping on the table. I'm awake. Good. We're starting the preserve operation today. Pa left money for supplies. Not much, but enough to get started. We need to go to town. Which is how Lenora found herself back in Red Hollow 2 days after she'd tried to leave it forever, sitting beside Maisie in a wagon that creaked like it might fall apart on every bump. The town looked different in daylight. Still rough, still hard, but somehow less hopeless. Or maybe Lenora was just too busy to feel hopeless anymore. They went to the general store first. The owner was a thin man with suspicious eyes who clearly didn't trust women doing business without a man present. Lenora ignored his attitude and negotiated prices on sugar, salt, mason jars, and cheesecloth with the systematic ruthlessness of someone who'd learned to squeeze value from nothing. "That's robbery," the shopkeeper said when she refused his first price. "That's economics," Lenora countered. "I can go to Henderson's store in Silver Creek. It's farther, but they're hungry for new business. Or you can sell to me at a fair price and guarantee regular orders all winter." He sold at a fair price. They loaded supplies into the wagon and headed to the next stop. A seamstress who, according to Maisie, had sold Martha fabric scraps cheap. "Mrs. Chen," the woman introduced herself. She was old Mr. Chen's wife, with sharp eyes that took in everything. "You're the woman who got left on the platform." "That's me." "And now you're working for Gideon Boone." "Working with him." "Yes." Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. Martha Boone was a good woman, smart, practical, the kind of person who saw problems and fixed them instead of complaining. "You remind me of her." "I didn't know her." "No. But you got her account book and her daughter's loyalty. That counts for something." She pulled out a bundle of fabric scraps. "These are yours if you want them. Martha used them for packaging. I'll give you the same price I gave her." They finished their shopping and started back toward the ranch, the wagon loaded with supplies that represented either the beginning of something or just more debt Lenora couldn't afford to think about. "People know you now," Maisie observed as they left town. "People know I'm the fool who came west for a husband who didn't exist." "Some of them think that. Others think you're brave for staying." Maisie paused. "Mrs. Chen liked you. That matters. She's got influence in town. If she tells people you're good people, they'll listen." "I'm not here to make friends." "No, but you're going to need customers eventually. Might as well have people not hate you." Back at the ranch, Lenora threw herself into work with single-minded intensity. She commandeered the kitchen, shoving aside Gideon's neglected dishes to make room for preserving equipment Martha had left in the cellar. Cast iron pots, massive wooden spoon, mason jars that needed sterilizing. Maisie showed her where Martha had harvested berries, wild patches up in the hills that still produced fruit this late in the season. They spent 2 days picking until their fingers were stained purple and their backs ached from bending over. Then came the actual preserving. Lenora had helped her mother make jam exactly twice before the woman died, which meant she remembered approximately nothing useful. She burned the first batch. The second batch didn't set properly. The third batch came out perfect, and she nearly cried with relief. "See," Maisie said, grinning. "You're getting it." "I'm getting lucky. There's a difference." But she kept going. Batch after batch. Berry preserves and pickled vegetables and experimental batches of herbs mixed with honey that might have medicinal properties or might just be expensive garbage. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, the kitchen filling with steam and the sharp smell of vinegar. Gideon came in after dark, filthy and exhausted, and stopped in the doorway of the kitchen. He stared at the rows of filled mason jars cooling on every available surface. "What's all this?" "Inventory," Lenora said without looking up from the pot she was stirring. 24 jars of berry preserves, 18 jars of pickled vegetables, 6 experimental batches of medicinal tinctures I'll test before trying to sell. Should be ready to take to market in 3 days. Gideon picked up one of the jars and held it to the lamplight. The preserves inside glowed dark red. "This looks like what Martha used to make. I'm using her recipes. Maisie showed me where she kept them written down." He set the jar down carefully. "How much did supplies cost?" $17. I negotiated down from 23. If we sell at Martha's old prices, we'll break even at 12 jars and profit after that. And if they don't sell, then we're out $17 and I'll find another strategy. But they'll sell. Mrs. Chen vouched for us. The general store owner's greedy enough to stock anything that might turn a profit. and minors will buy anything that reminds them they're still human. Gideon was quiet for a long moment, just looking at the jars. My wife worked herself half to death making these. I'm not your wife. No, you're not. He looked at her directly. So why are you working yourself half to death instead? Because I made a deal, 1 month, to prove I'm useful. I intend to prove it. Something shifted in his expression, not quite approval. Maybe just acknowledgement that she was serious. Don't burn down my kitchen, he said finally. I already did once, learned my lesson. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Then he grabbed some cold food from the pantry and disappeared upstairs without another word. Maisie emerged from where she'd been hiding in the doorway, eavesdropping. He likes you. He tolerates me. There's a difference. For Pa, tolerance is the same as liking someone. He don't tolerate people he actually dislikes. He just makes them leave. Lenora kept stirring the pot, watching preserves bubble and thicken. Your father's been hurt badly. He's not looking for friends or partners or whatever your 9-year-old brain thinks is happening here. I'm almost 10, and I ain't stupid. I know he's hurt, but hurt don't have to be forever. Sometimes it does. You hurt too, Maisie said quietly. I can tell. You got that same look he has sometimes, like you're waiting for the next bad thing. Lenora stopped stirring. Go to bed, Maisie. I'm just saying, 2 hurt people might be better at understanding each other than 2 people who don't know what hurt looks like. Bed, now. Maisie went, but she was smiling like she'd won an argument Lenora didn't know they were having. Alone in the kitchen, surrounded by steam and the smell of cooking fruit, Lenora kept working long after exhaustion told her to stop. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging that this fierce little girl was right. She was hurt, and the hurt was old and deep, and not something that could be fixed with hard work. But hard work could at least make the hurt useful. She finished the last batch around midnight, sealed the jars, and set them to cool. 24 more units of hope disguised as preserves. 24 more chances to prove that staying had been the right choice instead of just another disaster in a life full of them. Outside, the Montana night was cold and clear. Through the kitchen window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. In Philadelphia, she'd never seen stars like this. The city lights drowned them out. Here, they were so bright it hurt to look at them directly. Tomorrow she'd take the preserves to town. Tomorrow she'd find out if anyone actually wanted what she was selling. Tomorrow she'd face the possibility that this whole plan was just another version of believing in Marcus Holloway's lies. But tonight, standing in Martha Boone's kitchen making Martha Boone's recipes, Lenora allowed herself to feel something dangerous. Not quite hope. Just the possibility that maybe hope wasn't completely stupid. The preserves sold out in 4 days. Lenora stood in the general store watching the shopkeeper count coins into her hand with an expression that suggested he was personally offended by having to pay her. $42. More than double what she'd spent on supplies. Enough to prove the concept worked and still have money left over for the next batch. Miners came through yesterday, the shopkeeper said grudgingly. Bought 8 jars right off. Said it reminded them of home. He pushed the coins across the counter. I'll take another 20 jars if you can have them ready by next week. 25? Lenora countered. And I want payment on delivery, not consignment. That ain't how I do business. It is now. You know these sell. I'm not fronting you inventory you can sit on while I wait for money I need today. He glared at her. Then he nodded once, sharp. 25 jars, payment on delivery. But they better be as good as this batch. They'll be better. Outside, Maisie was waiting in the wagon, practically vibrating with excitement. Well, Lenora climbed up and showed her the coins. $42, plus another order for 25 jars. Maisie let out a whoop that startled the horses. I knew it! I told Pa this would work. It's one sale. Don't start celebrating yet. One sale is more than we had last week. Pa's gonna have to admit you were right. Gideon didn't admit anything when they got back to the ranch. He just looked at the coins Lenora set on the kitchen table, nodded once, and said, Good. Do it again. Then he went back outside to fight with a fence that was losing its battle with gravity. That's Pa for, I'm impressed, but I'll die before I say it out loud, Maisie translated. Your father has boundary issues with basic communication. He's been worse since Ma died. Used to talk more, laugh sometimes. Now it's like someone turned the volume down on everything he used to be. Lenora started pulling out supplies for the next batch. Grief does that. You talk like you know. I know enough. Lenora measured out sugar with more focus than the task required. Everyone loses someone eventually. Some people just lose more than others. Maisie was quiet for a moment, watching her work. Who'd you lose? My mother when I was 15. My father before that, but I barely remember him. A brother to fever when I was 10. After that, it was just me and factory work and trying to survive long enough to matter to someone. Is that why you came west? To matter? Lenora stopped measuring and looked at this too smart child who asked questions that drew blood. I came west because staying east meant dying slowly. The mattering part, that was supposed to be a side effect of finding someone who wanted me around. Pa wants you around. He's just too stubborn to say it. Your father tolerates me because I'm useful. That's not the same thing. Maybe that's how it starts, though, being useful. And then maybe after a while it turns into something more. You watch too many fairy tales. We don't got any books except Ma's Bible and the almanac. I make up my own stories. Maisie grinned. And my stories are better than fairy tales because the people in them are mean and complicated and don't fix everything with magic. That's called real life. Yeah, but real life's more interesting than people think. Take you and Pa. You're both stubborn and scared and pretending you don't need anybody. That's way more interesting than some princess waiting for rescue. Lenora threw a dish towel at her. Go feed the chickens before you philosophize us both to death. Maisie dodged, laughing, and ran out. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal if Lenora didn't think about it too hard. She and Maisie worked the preserve operation while Gideon fought the land and the cattle in his own exhaustion. They existed in parallel tracks, occasionally intersecting but never quite connecting. Except Lenora started noticing things. The way Gideon always made sure there was coffee ready in the morning before she came downstairs. How he'd started fixing things around the house that had been broken for months. A loose step, a stuck window, the door that wouldn't close properly. Small things. Nothing he'd acknowledge if she mentioned them. And then there were the evenings. Gideon had started coming into the kitchen while she worked. He'd grab some cold dinner, sit at the table with his account books and contracts, and just exist in the same space. He never talked much, just occasional comments about cattle prices or weather predictions or the fence in the north pasture that needed replacing before winter. It should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like something Lenora had been missing without knowing it. Just quiet company. Two people working separately but together, filling the silence with presence instead of words. One night, about 3 weeks into her stay, Gideon broke the usual silence. The bankman's coming tomorrow. Lenora looked up from the pot she was stirring. What does he want? Money. Same thing he always wants. Gideon's jaw was tight. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. He's been patient because my wife just died, and apparently that buys some sympathy, but sympathy's got limits. How much do we owe? $240, plus interest. The number hit like a fist. Lenora had brought in maybe $90 with the preserve operation so far. Nowhere near enough. How long can you stall him? I've been stalling him since June. He's done waiting. Gideon pushed away from the table and stood, pacing. I've got maybe $100 saved if I cash in everything that's not nailed down. That leaves $140 short. What happens if you can't pay? Foreclosure. Bank takes the ranch, auctions it off, keeps what I owe plus fees. We get whatever's left, which will be nothing after they finish calculating interest. There has to be another option. There isn't. I've looked. He stopped pacing and faced her directly. I'm telling you this because you've got a right to know. You've been working yourself half to death on the preserve operation, but it's not enough. It was never going to be enough. I let you try because... He stopped, looking away. Because Maisie needed to believe we still had a chance, and maybe I needed to believe it too for a while. So you're giving up. I'm facing reality. There's a difference. Lenora set down her spoon carefully. No. You're deciding reality's too hard, so you'd rather just surrender. I've been fighting for 18 months, Gideon said, his voice rising. I've worked until my hands bled. I've sold everything my wife owned that had value. I've missed meals so Maisie could eat. Don't you dare stand there and tell me I'm not fighting hard enough. I'm not saying you're not fighting hard enough. I'm saying you're fighting the wrong battle. Lenora grabbed the account book and opened it to the pages she'd been studying. You're trying to save the ranch by doing everything the same way you've always done it, just working harder, longer hours, more sacrifice. But the economics don't work that way. You can't outwork a losing business model. Then what's your brilliant solution? Leverage what we've built. The preserve operation isn't just making money, it's building reputation. People know the Boone name now. They associate it with quality goods. That's worth something. Not $240. No, but it might be worth a loan extension, or a partnership, or... Lenora stopped, an idea forming that was either brilliant or completely insane. Or a land swap. Gideon stared at her. A what? You've got 40 acres here that aren't producing anything. Grazing land you can't use because you don't have enough cattle. But that land has value to someone. Railroad investors, timber companies, someone who wants to expand. What if you sold or leased a portion to raise capital? Keep the core ranch and the house, but monetize the assets that are sitting dead. That land's been in my family for 30 years. And it'll be in someone else's family next month if you don't find $240. The truth of it hung between them like smoke. Gideon sat down heavily. I don't even know who'd want to buy parcels around here. I do. Or I can find out. Lenora pulled out the notes she'd been keeping, observations from town, conversations with shopkeepers, rumors about expansion and investment. The railroad's looking to extend the line north. Timber companies are always hungry for forest access. Even small ranchers who want to expand might pay for grazing rights. We just need to find the right buyer before the bank forecloses. That's a hell of a gamble. Everything's a gamble. At least this one has a chance of working. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were less dead than they'd been 3 weeks ago. Still tired, still grieving, but somewhere underneath, something like hope was trying not to drown. All right, he said finally. You've got 1 week. If you can find a buyer before the bank man comes back, we'll try it. If you can't, he stopped. If you can't, I want you to take Maisie when they foreclose. Take her somewhere safe. Don't let her watch them take the ranch. Where would I don't care. Anywhere that's not here. His voice cracked slightly. She's already lost her mother. She doesn't need to lose this too. Lenora's throat felt tight. I'm going to find a buyer. I hope you're right. He left the kitchen without another word. Lenora stood alone, surrounded by cooling preserves and impossible math, and started making a list of everyone in Red Hollow who might have money to spend on land they didn't need yet. The next morning, she rode into town alone. Gideon needed to stay at the ranch to meet the bankman. Maisie wanted to come, but Lenora told her no. This was business that required adult conversation, not a 9-year-old supervision. You're going to fix this, right? Maisie had asked before Lenora left. I'm going to try. That ain't the same as yes. No, it's not. Red Hollow looked different when you were riding into it with purpose instead of defeat. Lenora tied up the horse outside the land office and walked in with her spine straight and her desperation hidden somewhere it wouldn't show on her face. The clerk was young, bored, and clearly unused to women walking in asking about property transactions. I need to see current land surveys for the area around the Boone Ranch, Lenora said. And I need information on who's been buying property in the foothills over the last year. The clerk blinked. That's public record, but it'll take time to pull. I'll wait. He disappeared into a back room and returned 20 minutes later with maps and transaction records that were supposed to be organized but clearly weren't. Lenora spread them across the counter and started looking for patterns. Someone was buying land. Multiple parcels over the last 8 months, all in the same general area. Different names on the transactions, but the timing was too coordinated to be coincidence. This was systematic acquisition. Someone building towards something. Who represents these buyers? Lenora asked, pointing to 3 transactions. The clerk squinted at the records. Looks like a land agent out of Helena, fellow named Silas Crow. He's been through here a few times setting up deals for clients back east. Is he in town now? Think so. Usually stays at Granger's Inn when he's conducting business. Lenora thanked him and headed straight to the inn. She found Silas Crow in the dining room having breakfast that probably cost more than Gideon spent on food in a week. He was maybe 50, well-dressed in a way that screamed money, with sharp eyes that assessed her value the moment she walked up to his table. Mr. Crow, my name is Lenora Whitmore. I understand you represent investors interested in land around Red Hollow. He gestured to the empty chair. Miss Whitmore, please? Though I should mention I prefer to conduct business with property owners directly. I represent the Boone Ranch, 40 acres northwest of town. We're interested in discussing a sale or lease of a portion of the property. Crow's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest. The Boone property. Gideon Boone, correct? That's right. I'm familiar with his situation. Overextended, behind on the mortgage, the bank's getting impatient. He sipped his coffee calmly. Not a strong negotiating position. We're not negotiating from desperation. We're offering an opportunity for someone to acquire valuable land before it becomes available through less favorable channels. Meaning before the bank forecloses and you lose everything anyway. Lenora kept her expression neutral, meaning we're offering a direct transaction that benefits both parties. You get the land your clients want without competing at auction. We get capital to restructure our debt and continue operating. And what makes you think my clients want Boone's land specifically? Because you've been buying up everything around it for 8 months. You're building towards something, railroad access, timber operation, something that requires contiguous parcels. The Boone property sits right in the middle of what you're assembling. We both know you want it. The question is whether you'd prefer to buy it from us or wait for the bank to auction it off. Crow set down his coffee and studied her with new attention. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A desperate rancher begging for scraps. Instead, I get a woman who's done her research and knows exactly what leverage she has. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's interesting. Dangerous for you, but interesting. I'm not interested in being interesting. I'm interested in a fair price for good land. Fair is subjective. How much do you need to clear your debts? Lenora had prepared for this question. She'd calculated the minimum they needed and then added 30% because anyone who negotiated at their actual minimum was a fool. $300 for a 15-acre parcel on the northeast section. Good grazing land with water access, survey and title transfer included. That's robbery. That's market value for land you clearly want badly enough to spend 8 months assembling parcels around it. Crow leaned back in his chair. $200, final offer. $275. And that's me being generous because I'd rather close this deal today than drag it through the land office for the next month. $250. Cash payment? Title transfer completed within 3 days. Lenora extended her hand. Deal. They shook on it. Crow's grip was firm, calculated to project confidence without threatening. The handshake of a man who'd spent his life buying things from people who couldn't afford to keep them. I'll have papers drawn up by tomorrow, Crow said. Bring Gideon Boone to the land office to sign. And Miss Whitmore? You're wasted out on that ranch. A woman with your skills could do well in actual business. Something to consider when the ranch inevitably fails anyway. The ranch isn't failing. Not today. But next year? Year after? Boone's a broken man. You're just delaying the inevitable. He stood, dropping coins on the table for his breakfast. Still, I appreciate a good negotiation. Pleasure doing business with you. He left, taking his expensive cologne and his casual cruelty with him. Lenora sat alone at the table, her hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and rage, and the weird triumph of having just saved the ranch, while simultaneously feeling like she'd lost something important. $250. More than enough to clear the debt and have capital left over. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. So why did she feel like she'd just made a deal with something poisonous? She rode back to the ranch with the preliminary agreement in her pocket and victory sitting heavy in her chest. The sun was high when she arrived. Gideon was in the barn working on tack that should have been replaced years ago. He looked up when she walked in, his expression guarded. Well, I found a buyer. Silas Crow, land agent from Helena. He'll pay $250 for 15 acres on the northeast section. Cash payment, quick transfer. It's enough to clear the debt and have money left over for winter supplies. Gideon stared at her. You're serious. Papers will be ready tomorrow. He wants you at the land office to sign. $250. He said it like he was testing whether the words were real. That's more than I expected. He wanted the land badly enough to pay fair value. His clients are assembling parcels for something bigger. What kind of something bigger? He didn't say. Railroad, maybe. Timber operation? Does it matter? Gideon set down the bridle he'd been mending. What's he like, this Crow fellow? Professional, smart, the kind of man who knows exactly how much power he has in a negotiation and isn't afraid to use it. You don't trust him. It wasn't a question. Lenore considered lying, then decided Gideon deserved honesty. No, I don't. There's something off about him. The way he talked about you, about the ranch. Like he was disappointed we weren't desperate enough to be interesting. Like he wanted us to fail just so he could watch. Men like that exist, especially out here. Gideon walked over to where she stood, stopping a few feet away, close enough to see the exhaustion in his face, far enough to maintain the careful distance they'd been keeping. But you got us a deal anyway. He stopped, searching for words. That's not something I could have done. I'm not good at negotiations, at talking to people who think in numbers instead of honest work. You're good at other things. Maybe. But this... He gestured vaguely at the agreement in her hand. This is what was missing. What Martha used to handle, the business side, the strategy. I'm a rancher. I can work cattle and fix fences and read weather. But running a ranch is more than that, and I've been failing at the parts I don't understand. You're not failing. You're just doing it alone when you shouldn't have to. Something shifted in the space between them. Gideon looked at her directly, really looked at her, for maybe the first time since she'd arrived. His eyes weren't dead anymore, just tired and maybe a little bit hopeful in a way that looked painful on his face. You're staying, he said quietly, past the 1 month. If you'll have me. Yeah, I'll have you. He paused. Not because of Maisie's crazy ideas about marriage or whatever she's been plotting, but because this place needs you. He stopped, correcting himself. We need someone who can handle the things I can't. Fair wages, real partnership, not whatever Maisie's been imagining in her storybook brain, Lenora finished. I understand. Good. That's good. They stood in the barn, surrounded by dust motes floating in afternoon sun, not quite looking at each other, both pretending the moment wasn't heavier than it should be. Then Maisie's voice shattered the silence. Pa, Miss Whitmore, come quick. They both ran outside to find Maisie standing in the yard, pointing toward the road. A cloud of dust was approaching fast. Too fast for a casual visit. As it got closer, Lenora could make out a wagon with 2 men on the seat. The bank man had brought company. The wagon pulled up and a thin man in a dark suit climbed down, followed by someone Lenora recognized with a sick drop in her stomach. Silas Crow. Mr. Boone, the bank man said formally. I'm here about your overdue mortgage payments. I've got the money, Gideon said. We sold a parcel. $250. More than enough to clear what I owe. The bank man exchanged a look with Crow. I'm afraid there's been a complication. Mr. Crow here has brought to my attention some irregularities in your land title. What irregularities? Crow stepped forward, his expression professionally sympathetic. During my due diligence on the property Miss Whitmore offered to sell, I discovered some concerning discrepancies in the original homestead claim. The boundaries described in your father's documentation don't match the current survey. There's a question of whether you actually own all the land you claim to own. That's horseshit, Gideon said flatly. My father filed that claim 30 years ago. It's been registered since before Montana was even a territory. I'm sure it's just a clerical error, Crow said smoothly. But until it's resolved, the bank can't accept a land sale as payment. Too much legal risk. You understand. Lenora felt cold understanding wash over her. This was planned. Crow had never intended to buy the land. He'd wanted her to find him, wanted her to think she'd negotiated a solution, all while setting up this exact moment. How convenient, she said, her voice sharp. You discover these irregularities right after agreeing to purchase. Almost like you were looking for an excuse to back out. I don't back out of deals, Miss Whitmore. I simply refuse to complete transactions with unclear title. It's good business practice. It's extortion. It's due diligence. Crow turned to the bank man. I'd recommend foreclosure proceedings begin immediately, for the bank's protection. The bank man looked uncomfortable but nodded. Mr. Boone, I'm sorry. Unless you can clear the title discrepancy and provide payment in full by end of business tomorrow, I'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure. 1 day? Gideon's voice was dangerous. You're giving me 1 day to resolve a claim that's been valid for 3 decades? Those are my instructions. I'm sorry." They climbed back into the wagon and drove off, leaving dust and disaster in their wake. Gideon stood frozen, watching them disappear. Then he turned to Lenora. "This is why you didn't trust him." "Yes." "He was never going to buy the land." "No, he was gathering information, finding weaknesses, setting us up to fail so he could—" She stopped. "So he could what? Why does he want the ranch this badly?" "Because men like Crow always want something they don't have." Gideon's hands were clenched into fists. "And they don't care who they destroy getting it." Maisie had been silent through the whole exchange, her face pale. "What do we do now?" "We find the original homestead claim," Lenora said. "Tonight. If your grandfather filed it properly, there has to be documentation somewhere. Federal land office records, county records, something that proves the boundaries are legitimate. And if we can't find it?" Lenora looked at Gideon, then at Maisie, then at the ranch spread out around them, imperfect, struggling, but still breathing. "Then we find another way to fight, because I didn't negotiate with Silas Crow just to watch him steal everything we've been working for." "We?" Gideon said quietly. Lenora met his eyes. "Yes, we. Whether you like it or not, I'm invested now. This ranch doesn't fall without a fight." Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming in from the mountains, bringing with it the first real cold of the season. And in Red Hollow, Silas Crow sat in his expensive hotel room and smiled, certain that by tomorrow the Boone Ranch would be his for whatever price the bank wanted to accept. He'd underestimated Lenora Whitmore once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. But neither would she. They tore the house apart looking for the homestead claim. Gideon started in the attic, throwing open trunks that hadn't been touched since his father died. Lenora attacked the study where Martha had kept records, pulling out every folder and ledger book. Maisie searched the cellar, coughing through dust thick enough to choke on. By midnight, they'd found nothing except old receipts, Martha's recipe books, letters from relatives back east who never visited, and a photograph of Gideon's parents on their wedding day, looking young and hopeful in a way that hurt to see. "It has to be here," Gideon said, sitting on the floor surrounded by papers. "My father filed that claim legally. I watched him do it when I was 10 years old. He rode all the way to Helena with the surveyor's notes and came back with documentation." "Where would he have kept something that important?" Lenora asked. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere—" Gideon stopped. "The church." "What?" "When the territorial government was still unstable, people didn't trust keeping valuable papers at home. Too easy to lose in a fire or have stolen, so they'd leave them with the church for safekeeping. My father was friends with Reverend Michaels back then. If he was going to hide the claim anywhere, it'd be there." "The old church burned down 8 years ago," Maisie said quietly. "Remember? Lightning strike. Took half the building." Gideon's face went gray. "Right. I forgot." "But they rebuilt," Lenora said. "If documents were stored there, maybe they survived. Or maybe someone salvaged them during reconstruction." "It's past midnight. We can't exactly go knocking on the Reverend's door demanding to search through church records." "Why not? We've got 1 day before foreclosure. I'm not wasting 6 hours sleeping when we could be looking." Gideon looked at her like she'd suggested they rob a bank. "You want to wake up Reverend Patterson at midnight and tell him we need to dig through the church basement looking for 30-year-old land claims? Unless you've got a better idea." He didn't. None of them did. They rode into Red Hollow through darkness thick enough to feel solid. The town was dead quiet, just the sound of their horses and the wind cutting through the streets. The church sat on the north edge of town, a simple wooden structure with a crooked steeple and windows that caught moonlight like eyes. The Reverend's house was next door, a small cottage with a lamp still burning in one window. Gideon knocked. They waited. He knocked again, harder. The door opened to reveal Reverend Patterson, a man in his 60s with wild gray hair and a nightshirt that suggested they'd woken him from actual sleep, not just late-night reading. "Gideon Boone," he said, blinking. "It's the middle of the night." "I know, Reverend. I'm sorry. But this is an emergency. I need access to your church records, old records, from before the fire." "What kind of records?" "Homestead claims. My father might have left documentation with Reverend Michaels back in the 1840s. If any of that survived the fire destroyed most of the old storage." Patterson rubbed his eyes. "What's left is in the basement, but it's a mess. Water damage, smoke damage, papers stuck together. We've been meaning to organize it for years, but can we look tonight? Tonight? Why the urgency? Because the bank's foreclosing tomorrow if we can't prove our land claim is legitimate. Patterson studied them. Gideon desperate, Lenora defiant, Maisie practically vibrating with exhaustion and fear. All right, let me get dressed, but I'm not promising you'll find anything useful down there. The church basement smelled like mildew and old smoke. Patterson brought lamps and led them to a corner where salvaged documents sat in crates that looked like they'd been through hell and barely survived. This is everything we saved, he said. Michael's kept meticulous records, but the fire and water destroyed a lot. What's left is, well, you'll see. Lenora opened the first crate and understood immediately why Patterson looked apologetic. The papers inside were stuck together, water-stained, some partially burned. Reading them would require patience and luck in equal measure. Start separating pages carefully, she instructed. Don't tear anything. Even partial documents might have information we can use. They worked in silence, broken only by the sound of careful page turning and Maisie's occasional sniffles from the dust. An hour passed, then 2. Lenora's eyes burned from lamp smoke and exhaustion. Her fingers were black with old soot. Got something, Gideon said suddenly. They crowded around him. He held a document that was half burned on one edge, water damaged across the middle, but still mostly readable. It was a registry of homestead claims filed through the church in 1843. Gideon ran his fingers down the list. There, Thomas Boone filed April 15, 1843. Quarter section in the foothills northwest of Red Hollow Settlement. He looked up. That's my father. This proves he filed. But it doesn't prove the boundaries, Lenora said. Crow's claiming the survey doesn't match current records. We need the actual survey notes or the original claim documentation, not just a registry entry. They kept searching. 3 in the morning came and went. Patterson brought coffee that tasted like it had been made from boots and sympathy. Maisie fell asleep leaning against a crate. Lenora wanted to join her but forced herself to keep reading through documents that blurred together. Then she found it. Not in the church records at all, but tucked inside a Bible that had been stored with them. A folded piece of paper, brown with age, covered in careful handwriting, and a stamp from the Territorial Land Office. Gideon. He was at her side instantly. She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was the original homestead claim. Thomas Boone's signature at the bottom. Survey coordinates describing the property boundaries in mathematical detail. And across the top, an official stamp reading Approved, Territorial Land Office, Helena, 1843. That's it, Gideon breathed. That's the actual claim. Is it enough? Maisie asked, suddenly awake. It should be. This is original documentation with territorial approval. If Crow's claiming boundary discrepancies, this shows what the approved boundaries were. Patterson leaned over to look. May I? He examined the document carefully. This is legitimate. I recognize Michael's handwriting on the witness signature, and the territorial stamp is authentic. Can we take it? Gideon asked. It belongs with your family's papers, not here. Just bring it back when this is settled so we can add it to the historical record. They rode back to the ranch as dawn started breaking gray and cold. None of them had slept. Lenora felt like she was held together with coffee and desperation and nothing else. We need to get this to the land office before the bank man arrives, she said. Have it registered properly. Force Crow to admit his boundary concerns were bullshit. The land office doesn't open until 9, Gideon said. Bankman said he'd be here by noon. Then we're at the land office at 9 exactly. They cleaned up as best they could and headed back to town at 8:30, arriving at the land office just as the clerk was unlocking the door. He looked startled to see them. I need to register this document, Lenora said, handing over the homestead claim. Original territorial approval for the Boone property. I want it on official record with today's date and a certified copy for our files. The clerk examined it carefully. This is from 1843, which makes it valid documentation. You can verify the stamp with territorial records, but I need it registered now, today. That'll take time. I have to verify authenticity, cross-reference with current surveys, prepare the registration paperwork. How much time? Couple of days, maybe. I need it done in 2 hours. The clerk blinked. Miss, that's not... The bank is foreclosing on the Boone Ranch today. Land agent Silas Crow has claimed there are boundary discrepancies. This document proves the original boundaries were legally approved 30 years ago. If you don't register it immediately, a legitimate homestead claim will be invalidated, and a family will lose everything based on false accusations. Is that really how you want your office to operate? The clerk looked at Gideon, then at Maisie, then back at Lenora. I can have it registered by 11. That's the absolute fastest I can process this. Then start processing. They waited in the land office while the clerk disappeared into back rooms with the homestead claim. Maisie fell asleep in a chair. Gideon paced. Lenora watched the clock on the wall tick forward with agonizing slowness. At 10:45, Silas Crow walked in. He stopped when he saw them, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced with professional courtesy. Mr. Boone, Miss Whitmore, early start today. We're registering documentation, Lenora said flatly. Original homestead claim. Proves the boundaries you questioned are legitimate. Is that so? Crow's expression didn't change, but his eyes went sharp. May I see this documentation? It's being processed. You can see the certified copy when the land office provides it. I see. How fortunate that you found 30-year-old papers right when you needed them. He smiled, almost convenient enough to seem suspicious. Almost as suspicious as a land agent discovering boundary discrepancies right after agreeing to purchase, Lenora countered. I take due diligence seriously. You take sabotage seriously. There's a difference. Before Crow could respond, the clerk emerged with papers. Registration complete. Original document is now on file. Here's your certified copy showing the approved homestead boundaries as filed with the Territorial Land Office in 1843. He handed Lenora an official-looking document with stamps and signatures that screamed legitimacy. She passed it to Crow. Your boundary concerns are resolved. The sale can proceed. Crow examined the document with a face like carved stone. This changes things. It doesn't change anything. You agreed to buy 15 acres at $250. The title is clear. Complete the purchase or admit you were never negotiating in good faith. Miss Whitmore, I think you misunderstand the nature of our arrangement. I understand perfectly. You wanted us desperate enough to sell cheap or fail completely so you could buy the whole ranch through foreclosure. But we're not desperate anymore. We've got clear title and a buyer who already agreed to terms. So either honor your agreement or explain to the land office why you're backing out of a legitimate transaction. The clerk was watching this exchange with growing interest. Crow noticed and his expression hardened. Fine. $250 for 15 acres on the northeast section. Papers drawn up by tomorrow. Papers drawn up today. Payment today. I'm not giving you another night to manufacture problems. That's not standard practice. Nothing about this transaction has been standard practice. You want the land, you complete the purchase today. Otherwise, I'll find another buyer who's less interested in playing games. Crow's jaw tightened. For a moment, Lenora thought he might walk away just to spite them. Then he nodded once, sharp. Today. I'll have my attorney draw up papers by 2 o'clock. We'll sign at the land office. With payment. With payment. He left without another word. The clerk let out a low whistle. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you just beat Silas Crow at his own game. Nobody does that. First time for everything, Lenora said. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline, but she kept them hidden in her skirts. Gideon was staring at her like she'd grown a second head. Did you just... Backed him into a corner where backing out would cost him more than completing the deal? Yes. Lenora felt exhaustion crashing over her, but forced herself to stay upright. Now we wait for 2 o'clock and hope his attorney actually shows up. What if he doesn't? Then we find out just how vindictive Silas Crow really is. They killed time in the general store where the shopkeeper eyed them with open curiosity. Word had clearly spread about the foreclosure. Probably the whole town knew the bankman was coming for the Boone Ranch today. At 1:45, they returned to the land office. By 2 o'clock, Crow's attorney had arrived with papers that Lenora read line by line, looking for traps. She found 2 clauses that would have given Crow rights to access the remaining Boone property and struck them out before signing. That's part of the standard language, the attorney protested. Nothing about this is standard. Remove the clauses or we don't sign. The attorney looked at Crow, who nodded curtly. The clauses were removed. Papers were signed. Crow counted out $250 in cash that felt like victory and defeat simultaneously. Pleasure doing business with you, Crow said. His smile was cold. though I imagine we'll be seeing each other again. This territory is small. People with opposing interests tend to collide repeatedly. I'll look forward to it, Lenora lied. They left with the money and the registered homestead claim and made it exactly 2 blocks before Gideon had to stop and lean against a hitching post. We did it, he said quietly. We actually did it. We bought time, Lenora corrected. The immediate crisis is solved, but the underlying problems haven't changed. The ranch is still marginal. We're still operating on narrow margins. This money clears the debt, but it doesn't fix the economics. Can't you just enjoy winning for 5 minutes? I'll enjoy it when we're not one bad winter away from losing everything again. Gideon looked at her, and something in his expression made Lenora's breath catch. Not quite gratitude, heavier than that. Martha used to say that too, that winning once doesn't mean you stop fighting, that you celebrate fast and then get back to work before the next disaster shows up. She sounds like she was smart. She was. About everything except trusting me to keep this place alive without her. His voice went rough. I failed at that. For 18 months I failed at it. If you hadn't... He stopped. If Maisie hadn't dragged you here, we'd have lost everything today. But she did drag me here, and we didn't lose everything. That's what matters. Is it? Gideon pushed away from the hitching post. Because I keep thinking about what happens next, about how I almost destroyed what my parents built because I was too proud to admit I needed help, about how a stranger from Philadelphia saved my ranch when I couldn't save it myself. I'm not a stranger anymore. No, you're not. He looked at her directly. What are you then? The question hung between them like something dangerous. Lenora wanted to say partner, employee, someone passing through who'd accidentally gotten invested. But none of those words felt adequate for what had developed over the last month. I don't know, she admitted, but I know I'm not leaving, not yet, maybe not ever if... She stopped. If that's all right with you. Yeah, Gideon's voice was quiet. That's all right with me. They stood on the wooden sidewalk in Red Hollow with the afternoon sun breaking through clouds and the ranch waiting 12 miles away, and neither of them quite willing to name what was shifting between them. Then Maisie appeared, dragging her feet with exhaustion. Can we go home now? I'm tired and hungry, and I want to sleep for about 100 years. Yeah, kid, Gideon said, ruffling her hair. We can go home. They climbed into the wagon. As they rolled out of town, Lenora looked back and saw Silas Crow standing outside the land office, watching them leave. Even from a distance, his expression was unreadable. She turned forward and didn't look back again. The bank man arrived at 4 o'clock. Gideon met him in the yard with $240 cash and the registered homestead documentation. The man counted the money twice, examined the papers, and handed over a receipt marking the mortgage current. I'll be honest, Boone, he said. I didn't think you'd pull this off. Neither did I, Gideon admitted. After he left, the 3 of them stood in the kitchen staring at the receipt like it might disappear if they looked away. We should celebrate, Maisie said. Ma would have made a cake or something. I don't know how to make cake, Lenora said. Me neither. Pa, do you? Haven't made a cake since your mother died. They looked at each other. Then Maisie started laughing, the kind of exhausted laughter that came from surviving something that should have killed them. Lenora joined in, then Gideon, until all 3 of them were laughing like idiots in a kitchen that still needed cleaning while the sun set outside and the crisis passed into memory. The next 2 weeks were the hardest Lenora had worked since arriving. With the debt cleared and some capital left over, they had breathing room to actually plan instead of just surviving. She reorganized the preserve operation, negotiated better prices on supplies, established relationships with merchants in 3 different settlements. The money started coming in steadier. Not enough to get rich, but enough to stop drowning. Enough to fix the barn roof before winter. Enough to buy winter feed at a decent price instead of whatever desperate rate sellers charged when they knew you had no choice. Gideon threw himself into rebuilding the neglected parts of the ranch with new energy. He still didn't talk much, but he'd started including Lenora in decisions about livestock and land management. Small things at first, then bigger ones, until one day she realized they were running the ranch together instead of in parallel. You ever think about what you'd be doing right now if you'd gone back to Philadelphia? Maisie asked one evening while they worked on a new batch of preserves. Working a factory floor, living in a rented room smaller than your chicken coop, Eating bread and beans because that's what I could afford. Do you miss it? Not even a little bit. Good. Because Pa's happier with you here. He won't say it, but I can tell. He laughs sometimes now. Real laughs, not the fake kind he used to do when he was pretending everything was fine. Lenora kept her attention on the pot she was stirring. Your father's recovering from grief. That's different from being happy. Maybe, but grief recovery looks a lot like happiness if you squint. Maisie grinned. And I see how he looks at you when you're not paying attention. That ain't just gratitude for saving the ranch. Maisie, I'm just saying, Ma's been gone 18 months. At some point, Pa's going to realize it's okay to live again instead of just surviving. And when he does, I hope he's smart enough to see what's right in front of him. You're 9 years old. You shouldn't be playing matchmaker. I'm almost 10, and I'm not playing anything. I'm just observing facts and making helpful suggestions. Before Lenora could respond, Gideon walked in covered in dirt and looking tired in a satisfied way that meant the work had gone well. North fence is repaired, he announced. Should hold through winter. Might need reinforcing in spring, but... He stopped, noticing them staring at him. What? Nothing, Lenora said quickly. Maisie was just telling me about facts and observations, Maisie said innocently. Gideon looked suspicious. What kind of facts? Boring ones. About fences and winter and how much work we've gotten done. Uh-huh. He grabbed water from the pump and drank straight from the cup, which made Maisie wrinkle her nose. I need to go to town tomorrow. Cattle buyer's passing through, wants to talk about spring prices. Figured I'd take him out to see the herd, show him we're serious about rebuilding. I'll come with you, Lenora said. If you're negotiating prices, you'll want someone who understands the numbers. Yeah, good. He set down the cup awkwardly. We should probably leave early. Make a day of it. I'll be ready at dawn. After he left, Maisie gave Lenora a look that screamed, I told you so, without saying a word. The trip to town felt different from all the previous ones. Maybe because they weren't drowning in crisis. Maybe because Gideon actually talked during the ride, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about growing up in the territory. Small things, easy things. The kind of conversation that happened between people who were starting to trust each other. The cattle buyer meeting went well. Gideon knew his business when it came to livestock, and Lenora kept him from agreeing to prices that were technically fair, but not actually profitable. They shook hands on a spring delivery that would bring in real money if the herd stayed healthy through winter. You're good at this, Gideon said as they left the meeting. At what? Negotiating? Reading people. Knowing when someone's trying to cheat you versus when they're being honest. I would have taken his first offer because it sounded reasonable. Reasonable isn't the same as profitable. You deserve better than reasonable after the work you've put into rebuilding. They walked back toward where they'd left the wagon. Red Hollow was busy today, people moving between shops and businesses with the energy of a town that was growing instead of dying. Lenora felt someone watching and turned to see a man across the street staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was well-dressed, handsome in a calculated way, with the kind of smile that probably worked on women who didn't know better. Her stomach dropped. Edgar Vale. The con man who'd lured her west with letters and promises and lies was standing in Red Hollow, Montana territory, looking at her like he'd just found something he'd lost. Lenora? Gideon's voice cut through her shock. You all right? That man, she said quietly. Across the street. Don't look directly at him. Gideon looked directly at him. Who is he? Marcus Holloway, or Edgar Vale, or whatever name he's using this week. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. He's the man who wrote me the letters. The fake rancher. The reason I came to Montana. Edgar saw her looking and started crossing the street toward them. We need to leave, Lenora said. Right now. No. Gideon's voice was flat. I want to meet the man who almost destroyed your life. Edgar reached them before Lenora could argue. Up close, he was even more handsome, with charm that radiated off him like heat. The kind of man who could convince you black was white, and you'd thank him for the clarification. Lenora Whitmore, he said warmly. I thought that was you. What a coincidence running into you here. It's not a coincidence, Lenora said. You don't do coincidences. What do you want? Want? I don't want anything. I'm just surprised to see you still in Montana. I heard you'd been left at the station. Most women would have gone home after that. Most women weren't desperate enough to stay. Desperate. Edgar's eyes flicked to Gideon, assessing. Or maybe you found something better than the arrangement I offered. Who's your friend? None of your business. Gideon Boone, Gideon said, extending his hand. I own the ranch northwest of here. Lenora works with me. Edgar shook his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Works with you? How progressive. Most men out here would just call her hired help. Most men out here don't know the difference between working with someone and working for someone, Gideon countered. I do. I'm sure you do. Edgar turned back to Lenora. I feel terrible about what happened. The miscommunication with the ranch, the missed meeting. I tried to send word, but you'd already left Philadelphia by then. There was no miscommunication. You're a con man who sends fake letters to desperate women. You never had a ranch. You never intended to marry anyone. You just wanted... She stopped. Actually, I still don't know what you wanted. Money, usually, Edgar said easily. Women would send funds for travel expenses, household setup, wedding costs. Most never made it west. The ones who did usually turned around and went home once they realized the truth. You're the first one who stayed. Because I had nowhere else to go. And now? He looked at Gideon again. Now it seems you've landed quite comfortably. What are you doing in Red Hollow? Lenora asked. Business. I work with investors interested in frontier development, railroad expansion, land acquisition, that sort of thing. Legitimate business these days. I've reformed. You don't reform. You just find new ways to steal. Edgar laughed. You always did have a sharp tongue. I appreciated that about your letters. Most women wrote sentimental garbage. You wrote with intelligence. It made stringing you along almost feel unfair. Gideon's hand tightened on Lenora's arm. We're leaving now. Of course, but Lenora... Edgar's voice stopped them. We should talk properly. Compare notes on how we both ended up in this little corner of nowhere. Maybe over dinner? Never. Your loss. I could have told you some things about Silas Crow you'd find interesting, since I gather you've been doing business with him. Edgar's smile widened. Small territories breed strange partnerships. Sometimes the people you trust turn out to be less trustworthy than the ones you don't. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving poison in his wake. Lenora stood frozen, her mind racing. Edgar working with Crow. Both of them in Red Hollow at the same time. The failed land deal. The foreclosure threat. Pieces were connecting in ways that made her stomach hurt. That was him, Gideon said quietly. That was the man whose letters you believed. Yes, he's... Gideon stopped, searching for words. He's everything I'm not. Smooth, charming, the kind of man women probably fall for without thinking twice. I did fall for it. That's why I'm here. Do you regret it? The question came out raw. Coming here instead of meeting him? Lenora looked at Gideon, solid, honest, complicated in ways that Edgar Vale would never understand. No, I don't regret it. Edgar would have destroyed me. You gave me a chance to survive. It's more than surviving now, though, isn't it? Yes, it's more than that. They stood on the street while Red Hollow moved around them. Two people who'd found each other through disaster and were still figuring out what that meant. Then thunder cracked overhead. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Rain came down in sheets, sending people running for cover. Gideon grabbed Lenora's hand. Wagons this way. Run. They ran through the downpour, arriving at the wagon soaked and laughing despite everything. Gideon helped her up, his hand lingering on hers just a moment longer than necessary. As they drove out of town, Lenora looked back through the rain and saw Edgar Vale standing under an awning, watching them leave. And beside him, also watching, stood Silas Crow. They were talking, planning something. She could see it in their body language, in the way they kept their attention on the departing wagon. Gideon, she said quietly, we have a problem. Bigger than the foreclosure we just survived? Maybe. Edgar showing up here isn't coincidence, and him working with Crow isn't coincidence. They're planning something. Let them plan. We survived Crow once. We can do it again. Lenora wanted to believe that. But as they rode toward the ranch through rain that felt like a warning, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything they'd fought for was about to get much worse. Because men like Edgar Vale and Silas Crow didn't just plan. They destroyed. And they were just getting started. The attack came 3 nights later. Lenora woke to the smell of smoke and Maisie screaming. She stumbled out of bed disoriented, her lungs already burning. Through the window, she could see orange light flickering across the yard. The barn was on fire. She ran downstairs in her nightdress, grabbing a shawl that wouldn't do anything against the cold, but was better than nothing. Gideon was already outside, running toward the barn with a bucket. The doors were engulfed in flames. "The horses!" he shouted. "They're still inside!" Lenora heard them screaming. The sound cut through everything else, pure animal terror as smoke and fire closed in. Gideon was trying to get the main doors open, but the heat drove him back. "Side entrance!" Maisie yelled, appearing beside Lenora. Her face was streaked with soot and tears. "There's a side door Pa uses for feed delivery." They ran around the building. The side door wasn't fully engulfed yet, but smoke poured through the cracks. Gideon kicked it open, and smoke billowed out thick enough to blind them. "Stay back," he ordered. "Like hell," Lenora said, and followed him into the inferno. Inside was chaos. Fire had caught in the hay storage and was spreading fast, consuming dry wood and old rope, and everything that had made this barn functional. The horses were in stalls at the far end, kicking at doors and shrieking. Gideon reached the first stall and threw the door open. The horse inside bolted past him, nearly trampling Lenora on its way to freedom. She grabbed the next stall door and fought with the latch that had warped from heat. The horse inside was wild with fear, slamming into the walls. "Easy," she tried to say, but smoke choked the words. She got the latch open and the horse exploded out, catching her shoulder with its flank and sending her sprawling. Gideon pulled her up. "Get out! Now!" "Not without you." They got 2 more horses out before a section of roof collapsed, showering sparks and burning timber. The remaining horses, 3 more, were trapped behind debris. Gideon started pulling at the wreckage with his bare hands, oblivious to the burns. Lenora grabbed a pitchfork and used it as a lever, prying boards apart while her eyes streamed and her lungs screamed for air that wasn't poison. Behind them, more of the roof groaned and shifted. "It's coming down," Gideon said, coughing hard. "We need to—" The 3rd horse bolted through the gap they'd created, then the 4th. 1 left. Lenore could see it in the stall, pressed against the back wall, too terrified to move even with escape available. Gideon climbed over the debris and grabbed the horse's halter, pulling. The animal fought him, eyes rolling white. Another section of roof fell, missing them by inches. "Gideon!" Lenora screamed. He got the horse moving. They crashed through the debris together, Gideon half dragging the animal while fire raged around them. Lenora reached out and grabbed Gideon's arm, pulling both him and the horse toward the door. They made it outside just as the entire barn roof collapsed with a roar like the end of the world. They fell in the dirt, coughing and gasping. The horse ran off to join the others scattered across the property. Behind them, the barn burned like a funeral pyre, consuming everything they'd worked to maintain. Maisie threw herself at Gideon, sobbing. "I thought you were dead. I thought—" "I'm all right," he managed between coughs. "We're all right." But they weren't. Lenore could see it in his face as he turned to watch the barn burn. Everything it contained, tools, feed, equipment they couldn't afford to replace. Martha's saddle that he'd refused to sell. Medical supplies for the livestock. Seeds saved for spring planting. All of it turning to ash. "This wasn't an accident," Lenore said hoarsely. Gideon looked at her. "What?" "The doors were blocked from outside. I saw boards nailed across before you kicked them in. Someone did this. Someone wanted the horses to die. Who would—" He stopped. "Crow. Or Edgar. Or both of them." Lenora stood up shakily. "This is retaliation. For beating them at the land deal. For not breaking when they wanted us to break. They tried to burn us out. They tried to destroy you. All of you." Her voice was shaking with rage and smoke damage. "They failed with legal tricks, so they moved on to violence. By the time neighbors arrived with buckets and help, there was nothing left to save. The barn was a skeleton of charred beams and ash. The horses had survived, but they'd lost everything else. People stood around in their nightclothes, looking at the destruction with expressions that ranged from pity to suspicion. "Heard you've been having trouble with Silas Crow," old Mr. Chen said quietly to Gideon. "Heard he didn't like losing that land deal. You think Crow did this? I think men like Crow don't like being told no, and I think fire's a convenient way to send a message. Can we prove it?" In a territorial court with Crow's connections and money? Chen shook his head. You'd need witnesses, evidence, things that don't exist when rich men commit crimes in the dark. As dawn broke gray and ugly over the smoldering ruins, Lenora stood with Gideon and Maisie looking at what was left of their barn. What had taken years to build was gone in hours. What they'd fought so hard to save was damaged beyond any quick repair. We rebuild, Gideon said finally. His voice was raw from smoke and exhaustion. We rebuild, and we don't let them win. With what money? Lenora asked. We spent everything clearing the debt. We've got maybe $40 left. That won't even buy enough lumber for walls, let alone roof and stalls, and then we do it in pieces. We do it slowly. He stopped, looking at his hands. They were burned and blistered, already starting to swell. We figure something out. Pa, Maisie said quietly. Your hands. He looked at them like he'd forgotten they were attached to his body. They're fine. They're not fine, Lenora said. You can't work with hands like that. You can barely move your fingers. I'll manage. You'll get infection and lose them if you don't get treatment. Come inside. Let me clean and wrap them before they get worse. She half dragged him into the kitchen while Maisie put on water to boil. Lenora had basic medical supplies, things Martha had kept for emergencies that looked increasingly inadequate for what Gideon needed. She cleaned his hands as gently as possible while he sat stone-faced and silent. The burns were bad. 2nd degree on his palms, maybe worse. He'd grabbed burning wood with bare hands and hadn't even noticed until it was too late. You should have left the last horse, she said quietly. Couldn't leave it. Would have died. You almost died. But I didn't. He looked at her directly. Neither did you. Neither did Maisie. The horses survived. That's what matters. The barn matters. The equipment matters. Everything we just lost matters. Things can be replaced. You can't. The words hung between them. Lenora focused on wrapping his hands with strips of clean cloth, trying to ignore how close they'd come to watching him die in that fire. This is my fault, she said finally. I pushed Crow too hard. I humiliated him publicly. He's retaliating because I made him look weak. Crow's retaliating because he's a bastard who can't stand losing. That's on him, not you. Gideon winced as she tied off the bandage. Besides, if you hadn't pushed him, we'd have lost the ranch already. At least this way we're still standing. Standing in front of a burned barn with no way to rebuild it. We'll find a way. How? We're out of options, out of money, out of... She stopped, blinking back tears that came from smoke and exhaustion and the crushing weight of having fought so hard only to lose anyway. I'm sorry. I should have seen this coming. Should have known men like that don't just accept defeat. Lenora. Gideon reached out with his bandaged hand and touched her face gently. You saved this ranch. You saved Maisie. You saved me from drowning in grief and debt and my own stubbornness. Don't apologize for fighting back against men who deserve to lose. But they didn't lose. They burned down your barn. They burned down a building. They didn't burn us. His eyes were intense. You understand? They can take the barn, the equipment, everything physical, but they can't take what we built together unless we let them, unless we quit. I don't know how to not quit when there's nothing left to fight with. Then we figure it out together, same way we figured out everything else. Maisie appeared in the doorway, her face still smudged with soot. People are gathering in town, word spreading about the fire. Mrs. Chen says folks want to help. We can't accept charity, Gideon said automatically. It ain't charity if we pay them back later, and it ain't charity if they're helping because they're angry about what Crow did. Maisie's voice was fierce. People in Red Hollow been watching Crow buy up land and push families out for months. They're scared they're next. If we fight back, we're fighting for all of them. Lenora looked at Gideon. She's right. This isn't just about us anymore. Crow's trying to send a message to everyone. If we roll over, he wins. If we rebuild, we show everyone else they can fight too, Gideon finished. He stood slowly, favoring his burned hands. All right, let's go to town. Let's see who's willing to stand with us. Red Hollow's main street was more crowded than Lenora had ever seen it. People stood in clusters, talking in low, angry voices. When Gideon arrived with Lenora and Maisie, the conversation stopped. Everyone turned to stare. Then Mrs. Chen stepped forward. We heard about your barn, Gideon. Heard it was set deliberately. I don't have proof, Gideon said carefully. Don't need proof to know what everybody already knows. Crow's been terrorizing this territory for months. You're just the first one to stand up to him publicly. She looked around at the gathered crowd. We've been talking, decided we're tired of watching families get pushed out by men with money and connections. So we're helping you rebuild. I can't pay. Didn't ask you to pay. Asked you to let us help. There's a difference. She pulled out a list. We got lumber pledged from the mill, tools from those who can spare them, labor from men who know how to raise a barn. If we start today, we can have walls up by next week. Gideon looked overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, a voice called from the crowd. Others echoed it. Say yes, and let us fight back. Before Gideon could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of the gathering. People parted to reveal Silas Crow striding through like he owned the street. Behind him, wearing an expression of calculated sympathy, came Edgar Vale. I heard about the fire, Crow announced loudly. Terrible tragedy. These things happen on frontier ranches. Old buildings, careless handling of lanterns, dry hay. A recipe for disaster. It wasn't careless, Lenora said. Her voice cut through the murmuring crowd. The doors were barred from outside. This was arson. Strong accusation, Miss Whitmore. Do you have evidence? I have common sense. I have timing. I have a man who lost a land deal 2 weeks ago suddenly experiencing a catastrophic fire. Crow's expression hardened. Be careful with your accusations. Slander is actionable in territorial court. So is arson. Then by all means, file a complaint. Bring your evidence to the sheriff. I'm sure he'll investigate thoroughly. Crow's smile was cold. Though without proof, without witnesses, I imagine the case will go nowhere. Fires happen, accidents happen. Sometimes people who've been under financial stress for years make mistakes that cost them everything. You son of a... Gideon started forward. Lenora grabbed his arm. Don't. That's what he wants. A public confrontation he can use against us. Edgar stepped up beside Crow, his charming smile in place. Perhaps I can help resolve this situation. I've been discussing opportunities with Mr. Crow. His clients are still interested in acquiring property in this area. Given your recent losses, Mr. Boone, perhaps now would be a good time to consider selling. The entire ranch. Fair price, quick transaction. You could relocate somewhere less challenging. We're not selling, Gideon said flatly. You should reconsider. Without a barn, without equipment, with winter coming, how exactly do you plan to survive? Charity from neighbors? Edgar's voice carried across the crowd. That won't last. Charity never does. People get tired of supporting lost causes. The only lost cause here is your attempt to steal land through intimidation, Lenora said. People see what you're doing, both of you, and they're not scared anymore. They should be, Crow said quietly, because accidents keep happening to people who make poor choices. Fires, equipment failures, livestock deaths. Strange how bad luck follows those who refuse reasonable offers. The threat was clear, blatant, said loud enough for everyone to hear, and that, Lenore realized, was his mistake. She turned to the crowd. Everyone hear that? Mr. Crow just threatened continued attacks on anyone who refuses to sell to him, in front of witnesses, in broad daylight. She looked at the town sheriff, a tired man who'd been standing at the edge of the gathering. Sheriff Willis, you heard it too. That's conspiracy to commit violence. That's extortion. Are you going to do anything about it? Sheriff Willis looked uncomfortable. Miss, that's not exactly... It's exactly what he said. And if you don't act on it, you're complicit in whatever happens next. When the next barn burns, when the next family loses everything, that's on you for doing nothing when you had the chance. The sheriff looked at Crow, then at the crowd, then back at Lenora. The political calculation played across his face. Crow had money and connections, but the crowd had votes and numbers and growing anger. Mr. Crow, Willis said slowly, I'm going to need you to come to my office. Answer some questions about your whereabouts last night. This is ridiculous, Crow said. I was at Granger's Inn. The proprietor can confirm. Then it'll be a short conversation. Willis's hand moved to his gun belt. Not threatening, just present. But you're coming to my office. Now. For a moment, Crow looked like he might refuse. Then he smiled coldly. Of course, Sheriff. Always happy to cooperate with local law enforcement, though I imagine my attorney will have questions about harassment and false accusations. Bring your attorney. We'll have a nice long talk. As Willis escorted Crow away, Edgar gave Lenora a look that was pure poison wrapped in charm. "You're making powerful enemies. I've survived worse than you. Have you?" He leaned closer, voice dropping so only she could hear. "You came west on my lies. You're here because I put you here. Everything you built on a foundation of fraud. Don't forget that." "I came west on your lies," Lenora agreed. "But I stayed on my own strength. I built this on my own work. You don't get to claim any part of what I've survived." "We'll see." Edgar tipped his hat mockingly and followed Crow toward the sheriff's office. The crowd erupted into conversation the moment they left. Lenora felt her legs go weak. She'd just publicly accused the most powerful man in the territory of arson and conspiracy. She'd threatened the sheriff with complicity. She'd burned every bridge that could have led to an easy resolution. And she'd done it in front of everyone. "That was either really brave or really stupid," Mrs. Chen observed. "Probably both," Lenora admitted. "Good. Brave and stupid is what changes things." Mrs. Chen raised her voice. "All right, everyone, we got a barn to rebuild. Let's stop talking and start working." The next week was controlled chaos. True to their word, people showed up to help. Men who knew construction brought tools and expertise. Women brought food and medical supplies. Children hauled water and cleared debris. The lumber mill owner donated materials at cost. Even people who'd never spoken to Gideon before appeared to offer labor. It wasn't charity. It was defiance. Every nail driven into new wood was a refusal to be intimidated. Every board raised was proof that Crow's threats wouldn't work. The barn rising from ashes became a symbol of something bigger than one family's survival. Gideon worked despite his burned hands, directing construction with quiet competence. Lenora handled logistics, making sure supplies kept flowing and workers were fed. Maisie ran messages between sites, too excited by the community effort to notice her own exhaustion. On the fourth day, the sheriff came by. "Wanted to update you," Willis said, looking tired. I questioned Crow. "His alibi checks out. He was at the inn all night. Proprietor confirms it. No way he set that fire personally." "But he hired someone who did," Lenora said. "Probably, but I cannot prove it. Crow's got money for good lawyers. They'll tear apart any case I try to build based on suspicion." Willis paused. "However, I did find something interesting. Been looking into Crow's land purchases. Turns out several of them were fraudulent. Forged signatures, coerced sales, deed transfers that don't match county records. Started an official investigation. Won't help you with the fire, but it might put Crow out of business in this territory." "How long will that take?" "Months. Maybe longer. But it's something." After Willis left, Gideon sat on a stack of lumber looking at his bandaged hands. Even if Crow goes down eventually, he's still out there now. Still dangerous. Nothing stops him from burning down the new barn the day we finish it. Then we watch. We guard. We don't give him another opportunity. Lenora sat beside him. But we also don't live in fear. That's what he wants. To make us scared enough to surrender. "I'm tired of fighting." "I know, but you're still here, still working, still refusing to quit. That's not someone who's done fighting. That's someone who's tired but hasn't broken yet." Gideon looked at her, really looked at her. "When did you get so stubborn?" "I was born stubborn. It's how I survived everything else that tried to kill me." "Everything else?" "Dead parents, poverty, factory work that crushed spirits faster than it crushed textile. Marcus Holloway's lies. Getting abandoned on a train platform in the middle of nowhere." She smiled without humor. "Turns out, I'm hard to destroy permanently. I just keep adapting." "That's not adapting. That's—" He stopped, searching for the word. "That's refusing to die when dying would be easier. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah, adapting is what animals do. What you're doing, that's fighting like hell because you believe things can get better, even when all the evidence says they won't." "And what are you doing?" "Same thing. Fighting because someone convinced me it was worth it." His eyes were gray and intense. "You convinced me. You and Maisie. You both refused to let me drown in grief, and I was too tired to keep refusing the help. So we saved each other." "Yeah, something like that." They sat in silence while around them people worked to raise walls that would shelter the horses they'd nearly lost. The sun was setting, turning everything gold and red. In that light, with the sounds of construction and community surrounding them, Lenora felt something shift. This was home. Not the ranch specifically, but this. The fighting, the surviving, the refusing to break when breaking would be so much easier. This was what she'd been looking for without knowing it. Not romance, not rescue. Just the opportunity to matter to something bigger than her own survival. By the end of the week, the barn had walls and a roof. Not finished. They'd need more time for stalls and proper storage. But functional, protected, strong enough to shelter the horses and equipment through winter. The night they completed the roof, someone threw a party in the yard. Informal, chaotic, with food brought from a dozen different kitchens and music from a fiddle player who showed up uninvited. People danced in the firelight while children ran wild and horses watched from their temporary corral with what might have been approval. Lenora stood apart, watching the celebration, still not quite believing any of this was real. Gideon found her. "You should be celebrating. This is your victory as much as anyone's." "It's everyone's victory. She paused. "I just kept us from losing. That's different from actually winning. Keeping us from losing is winning when you're fighting people like Crow and Edgar. They're still out there, still planning. This isn't over. No, but we survived the worst they could throw at us. That counts for something." He hesitated. "Dance with me." "I don't dance." "Neither do I. We'll be terrible together." Before she could protest, he pulled her into the crowd. They were terrible. Gideon moving stiffly because of his healing hands, Lenora with no rhythm whatsoever. But everyone else was just as bad, and nobody cared. The point wasn't grace. It was defiance disguised as joy. Maisie appeared, grabbing Lenora's hand. "Miss Whitmore, look." She pointed to the new barn. Someone had hung a sign over the door reading Boone Ranch, rebuilt October 1869. "We're official now, a real ranch again." "We were always real," Lenora said, "just harder to see for a while." "You're going to stay, right? Forever?" "Maisie, please say yes. Pa needs you. I need you. The ranch needs you. We're a family now, even if we don't got papers that say so." Lenora looked at Gideon, who was trying very hard to appear like he wasn't listening to every word. "Your father and I know, you're partners, business partners, whatever you want to call it." Maisie grinned. "But partnership's just another word for family when you're fighting to survive together." Before Lenora could respond, shouting erupted from the edge of the property. The music stopped. People turned toward the disturbance. A rider was coming fast, silhouetted against the firelight. As he got closer, Lenora recognized him. The land office clerk. He pulled up, breathing hard. "Gideon Boone? You need to come to town. Now, something happened at the courthouse." "What happened?" "Edgar Vale tried to file papers claiming Lenora Whitmore is his legal wife. Says she signed a contract back east. Says she abandoned the marriage and you're harboring her illegally. He's demanding she be turned over to him and you be charged with—" The clerk stopped, looking at Lenora. "He's got documents, signatures, a whole legal case built on you belonging to him." The words hit like ice water. Lenora's mind raced. She'd never signed marriage papers, never agreed to anything legal with Edgar, but she'd written letters. She'd accepted his offer to come west. If he'd forged documents around that correspondence— "That's insane," Gideon said. "Lenora's not married. She's not bound to anyone." "Tell that to the judge. Edgar's attorney is real good. Knows how to twist territorial law about mail order arrangements. Says women who accept passage money and travel to meet a man are entering a binding agreement. Says she broke that agreement and now owes restitution." "This is extortion," Lenora said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "Edgar and Crow are working together. The barn fire didn't break us, so now they're trying legal attacks. Don't matter if it's extortion, if the judge believes the documents." The clerk looked apologetic. "You need to come defend yourself, both of you, tomorrow morning. If you don't show, the judge rules by default and—" He stopped. "Just be there." After he left, the party died quickly. People offered support, but everyone knew this was different from rebuilding barns. This was legal warfare, and most of them had no experience fighting that kind of battle. Lenora stood in the kitchen after everyone left, staring at nothing. Gideon sat at the table, Maisie pressed against his side, looking scared. "We fight it," Gideon said. We go to court and prove Edgar's lying." "With what proof?" "I wrote him letters. I accepted his offer to travel. If he's forged a marriage contract and I can't prove I never signed it—" Lenora stopped. "Signatures from years ago. Who's going to remember what my handwriting looked like? Who's going to believe me over a man with money and a good attorney? I believe you. That won't be enough. Then what do we do? Lenora looked at him across the kitchen, at Maisie, at everything they'd built together over impossible months. I leave. Tonight. Disappear before the hearing. Without me here, Edgar's case falls apart. No, Gideon said flatly. It's the only option that... No. He stood up. You're not running. Not from him. Not from this. We fought too hard to let them win now. If I stay and Edgar wins, I'm his legal property. He can take me anywhere, do anything. You can't fight that. Watch me. Gideon, marry me. The words stopped everything. Even Maisie went silent. What? Lenora whispered. Marry me. Tonight. Real marriage? Legal marriage? If you're my wife, Edgar's claim is void. You're not abandoning a contract. You're married to someone else. Territorial law is real clear on that. Can't enforce a marriage contract against someone who's already married. That's insane. It's strategy, same as everything else we've done. He stepped closer. I'm not asking because I love you, though maybe I'm starting to. I'm not asking because Maisie wants a mother, though she does. I'm asking because it's the smartest move we've got. Partnership, protection, legal standing, everything we've built formalized in a way Edgar can't attack. Marriage isn't a business contract. Out here it is. Half the marriages in this territory are arrangements between people who needed each other to survive. Love comes later if you're lucky. We've already got the survival part figured out. The rest, he paused. The rest we can figure out together if you're willing. Lenora looked at this man who'd been broken by grief and was still fighting anyway, who'd pulled horses from burning buildings and rebuilt with burned hands and refused to let her run even when running was logical. She looked at Maisie, who was holding her breath waiting for an answer. She looked at the ranch outside the window, imperfect and struggling, but still standing. Yes, she said quietly. I'll marry you. They rode to Reverend Patterson's house at midnight. He answered the door looking confused until Gideon explained the situation in terse sentences that left out nothing. You want me to marry you right now? Tonight? Before the courthouse opens tomorrow. Legal marriage, properly witnessed, registered immediately. Gideon's voice was intense. Can you do it? Patterson looked at Lenora. Miss Whitmore, do you want this marriage? Not because it's strategic or necessary, but because you actually want to marry this man? Lenora met Gideon's eyes. She thought about refusing, about running instead, about choosing any other option that didn't involve tying her life permanently to a man she'd known for 2 months. But she'd spent her whole life running from one disaster to another, and every time she ran, she ended up smaller and more desperate. Gideon was offering something different, not rescue, partnership, the chance to fight together instead of alone. Yes, she said, I want this marriage. Patterson married them in his small living room with Maisie and his wife as witnesses. No flowers, no white dress, no music. Just legal words spoken over 2 people who'd found each other through disaster and were choosing each other now to survive what came next. When Patterson pronounced them married, Gideon kissed her briefly. It wasn't romantic, it was confirmation, sealing the deal they'd both agreed to. You're my wife now, he said quietly, and you're my husband. We'll figure out what that means as we go. Yeah, we will. They filed the marriage certificate at the land office first thing in the morning, making sure it was properly registered before heading to the courthouse. Edgar was already there with his attorney, looking confident. Crow stood behind him, watching with cold eyes. The judge called the case. Edgar's attorney stood and began presenting the marriage contract claim with forged documents that looked legitimate enough to be terrifying. Then Lenora stood. Your Honor, I can't be held to a marriage contract with Edgar Vale because I'm already married, to Gideon Boone, as of last night. Here's the certificate, properly witnessed and registered. The courtroom erupted. Edgar went pale with rage. His attorney looked like he'd been hit. This is fraud, Edgar shouted. She married him to avoid legal obligations. She married him because he asked, and she said yes, Gideon said, standing. That's how marriage works. And territorial law says a legitimate marriage voids any prior marriage claims. You want to argue that? Take it up with the territorial government. The judge examined the marriage certificate carefully. This appears legitimate, properly witnessed, registered with the land office. Unless you're claiming the marriage itself is fraudulent, Mr. Vale? I'm claiming she married him specifically to avoid my legal claim. So she married someone she wanted to marry instead of being forced into a marriage with someone she didn't want? That's not fraud. That's using available legal options. The judge handed back the certificate. Your claim is denied. Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Boone, is legally married to Gideon Boone. You have no standing. Edgar looked like he might physically attack someone. Crow put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. They exchanged looks that promised this wasn't over. But it was over. At least this part of it. Outside the courthouse, Lenora felt dizzy. We did it. We did, Gideon agreed. I'm actually married to you. Yeah. That's... She stopped. I don't know what that is. Weird. Definitely weird. But also... He paused. Also maybe the smartest decision we've made. Maisie threw her arms around both of them. I got a ma again. A real one. This is the best day ever. I'm not replacing your mother, Lenora said gently. I know. You're different, but you're still mine. You're still family. Maisie's eyes were bright. And now it's official, and nobody can take you away. Over the next weeks, they settled into their new reality. Marriage didn't change much practically. They'd already been working together, eating together, surviving together. But something shifted anyway. Small things. The way Gideon asked her opinion instead of just accepting her help. The way Lenora stopped second-guessing her right to be there. The way Maisie started calling her ma without asking permission first. The preserve business kept growing. With winter approaching, demand for shelf-stable goods exploded. Lenora hired 2 women from town to help with production, turning the kitchen into a small factory. Money came in steadily. Not wealth, but enough to breathe. Enough to plan beyond next week. Crow and Edgar disappeared from Red Hollow. Word spread that the investigation into Crow's land deals had expanded to include fraud charges. Edgar apparently moved on to another territory, another group of desperate women to con. The barn stood solid through the first snowstorm. The horses stayed healthy. The ranch breathed easier than it had in years. And on a night in late November, with snow falling quiet outside and Maisie asleep upstairs, Gideon found Lenora in the kitchen working on accounts by lamplight. You should sleep, he said. So should you. He sat across from her. Been thinking about what we are, about what this marriage is. What we agreed it would be. Partnership. Strategy. Yeah, that's what we said. He looked at his hands, still scarred from the fire. But it's become more than that. At least for me. And I thought you should know, in case that changes anything. Lenora set down her pen. Changes what? What you want from this arrangement? I know you agreed to marriage for protection, for legal standing. I'm not expecting... He stopped, frustrated. I'm saying I care about you, more than partnership, more than gratitude. And if you don't feel the same way, that's fine. We can keep going like we have been. But if you do feel something similar, then maybe we stop pretending this is just strategy, Lenora finished. Maybe we admit we chose each other not just because we needed each other, but because we wanted each other. Yeah, that. She reached across the table and took his scarred hand. I'm terrified of this, of wanting something that could be taken away. I've lost everyone I cared about, my family, my future. Every time I let myself want something, it gets destroyed. Same. Losing Martha destroyed me. I spent 18 months convinced I'd never want anything again except to keep Maisie alive. He squeezed her hand gently. But you showed up and refused to let me stay destroyed. And somewhere between fighting foreclosure and surviving arson and getting married despite Edgar, I started wanting things again. Specifically, I started wanting you, not just your help, you. This could still fail. The ranch could fail. We could fail. Probably. We're both stubborn and damaged and terrible at talking about feelings. He smiled slightly. But we're good at fighting together. And maybe that's enough to build on. Maybe. They sat holding hands across the kitchen table where they'd fought over accounts and planned strategy, and slowly, without meaning to, built something that looked like love disguised as survival. I don't know how to be a wife, Lenora admitted. I don't know how to be a husband anymore. First time around I was young and stupid and lucky. This time I'm older and still stupid, but maybe less lucky and more deliberate. Deliberate. That's one word for us. What's a better word? Lenora thought about it. Stubborn, determined, refusing to break even when breaking would be easier, fighting like hell because we believe things can get better even when all the evidence says they won't. That's a lot of words. It's what we are, though, both of us. We're the people who don't quit, who find each other in disasters and build something new from the wreckage. Yeah, Gideon said quietly, that's exactly what we are. Spring came with new grass and calves born healthy, and the first signs that the ranch might actually survive long term. The preserve business was profitable enough that Lenora started experimenting with new products. The barn Gideon had thought would take years to complete got finished in months with continued help from neighbors who'd decided the boons were worth investing in. On an April morning when the air smelled like possibility, Lenora told Gideon she was pregnant. He stared at her. "You're sure?" 3 months. I've been sure for a while, just took time to believe it myself. We're going to... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Have a baby. Yes. Sometime in October if everything goes right. Gideon sat down heavily. I don't know how to do this again. Last time Martha handled everything. I just showed up and tried not to panic. Then I guess we'll both panic together. Lenora sat beside him. This wasn't planned. Wasn't what either of us expected from a marriage that started as legal strategy. But it's happening. Are you scared? Terrified, but also... She paused. Also maybe a little bit hopeful. Like this is proof we're not just surviving anymore. We're actually building a future. He took her hand. Yeah, a future. That sounds good. Maisie found out an hour later and spent the rest of the day planning how she'd be the best big sister in Montana territory. Her enthusiasm was exhausting and exactly what both Lenora and Gideon needed. The baby came in October during the first snowstorm of the season, a boy who screamed with the same stubborn determination his parents had shown in everything else. They named him Thomas, after Gideon's father, and he fit into the ranch like he'd always been part of the plan. Years later, Lenora would stand on the porch watching Maisie teach Thomas to feed chickens and think about the impossible path that had led her here. From Philadelphia's factories to an abandoned train platform to a dying ranch that became home. From believing she was worth nothing to understanding she was worth fighting for. The ranch wasn't perfect. They still struggled some winters, still fought with suppliers and weather and the endless work of keeping a frontier operation alive. But they were fighting together, building together, creating something that belonged to all of them. And on nights when the work was done and the children were asleep and she sat with Gideon in the quiet kitchen where they'd first learned to trust each other, Lenora understood something important. Rescue wasn't someone riding in to save you. Rescue was finding the strength to save yourself and then discovering you didn't have to do it alone. It was partnership built from desperation that became something stronger. It was refusing to quit when quitting would be easier and discovering that stubbornness could transform into love if you gave it time. She'd come west expecting one kind of marriage and found something completely different. Not perfect, not easy, just real and hard and worth every fight it took to build. What are you thinking about? Gideon asked, noticing her expression. About how I got left on a train platform, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. That's a strange thing to be grateful for. I'm a strange woman. You married me anyway. Best decision I ever made, even if we did it to spite Edgar. Especially because we did it to spite Edgar. She leaned against his shoulder. We built something good out of disaster. That's worth celebrating. Yeah, he agreed quietly. It is. Outside, snow fell soft across the ranch they'd saved together. The barn stood solid. The horses were fed and warm. The preserves business was thriving. And inside the house, their children slept safe and loved. It wasn't the life Lenora had imagined when she stepped off that train. It was better, harder, messier, more complicated, but better because it was real. Because she'd learned that sometimes the best futures grew from the worst beginnings. That disaster could become opportunity if you were stubborn enough to survive it. That family wasn't always the people you started with. Sometimes it was the people you fought beside when everything else fell apart. And that being left behind by a con man on a Montana train platform wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of everything that mattered.